Chapter 576. From the very start, we have been observing the demon priest who is currently praying to the snake god. He had been constantly summoning divine arts, but nobody took him seriously. That was because the chaos evil gods were fundamentally different from the order gods. The chaos evil gods were primordial gods that could advance on their own and didn't rely too much on the power of belief. But on the other hand, they also lacked a sense of responsibility towards their believers. That's right, a sense of responsibility. Although it sounded rather strange, there would often be some sort of contract or mysterious relationship between the gods and mortal believers. The order gods and their believers were just like a registered, formal company. The benefits and treatment were all clear, and the company's business, spirit, and rules were all clear. There was even room for improvement. If the priests did an excellent job, the company's performance would increase, and the god company's power level would increase by another level. The believers and priests would also receive God's blessing, places to spread their religion, and authority in return. But if the company collapsed or the god died, all the employees would naturally lose their jobs. And in this aspect, the chaos evil gods who were no longer bound by order and rules were completely different. The chaos evil gods and their evil cultists were just like a secret, illegal black company. The boss wouldn't set any clear rules, and everything would be decided by him alone. Meanwhile, the company's goal was to make the boss rich and improve himself. The employees were nothing more than tools with no guarantees. This highlighted the foundational difference between the chaos evil gods and the order gods. The order gods were like legal companies that competed in the market. Apart from very few situations, they had to compete legally according to the rules, competing on management, and so on. But rather than having the chaos evil gods illegal companies operate, it would be better to directly rob them. Stealing a divine concept, divinity, and devouring a weak god would be more effective than the order gods' thousands of years of accumulation. That was why the chaos evil gods were far more aggressive than the order gods. In such a situation, the great majority of evil gods viewed their believers as useful tools, or more accurately, slaves that voluntarily offered sacrifices to them. As long as their goal was achieved, who would care about whether the tools were good or bad? Just look at Rose from back in the day. Not a single order god would allow their worshippers to kill each other, as that would reduce the total amount of faith in them. Yet, Rose only hoped for the strongest chess pieces. She would bestow divine favor upon murderers and slaughterers, and punish the weak and kind. She viewed the elven gods as her mortal enemies and prey. Therefore, believing in an evil god could make one rich overnight, as long as one was to the big boss's liking and was appreciated by the big boss. However, there's also a possibility that one would become a pawn in an evil god scheme and die mysteriously. As far as I know, 99% of the cases where you become rich overnight, you've already stepped into the evil god's chess game and can't extricate yourself. Those old and cunning fellows will never make a losing deal. The infighting between them is extremely intense. Both sides are competitors, but also prey. Perhaps the most pitiful of all would be the soul black contract. Even if you died, your soul would still have to report to the evil gods. At that time, the evil gods would determine whether you would be transformed into a god's servant, devil, demon, or something like that, or directly converted into soul coins, snacks, or raw materials. In essence, the order gods and the chaos evil gods were all the same. They only pursued their own personal benefits. Who would care about the lives of mortals? It was just like how both sides chased after personal benefits. The only difference was that one side was a bit nicer and focused on long-term business, while the other side didn't have any restrictions or obstacles and dared to do anything. However, the risks were also high, and the benefits came and went quickly. As we travel through the abyss, we naturally have to deal with the evil gods of chaos. The snake god's information was no secret. He was the guardian god of snake demons, snake people, and lizard men. He was also the god of poison. His true form was probably a gigantic venomous snake from ancient times. His combat experience wasn't particularly outstanding, and his attack power was the weakest among all the evil gods. However, he had lived for a long time, and that was the strongest sign of all. The Chaos Abyss was no friendly place. I didn't want to provoke such an ancient artifact. Who knew what trump cards he had hidden up his sleeves? However, his cautious personality made me feel much more reassured. As for the snake god's believers, praying to the snake god's power, I had killed so many lizard men over the past few days that I could fill a warehouse with them. Yet, I hadn't seen a single lizard man that actually managed to summon an evil god's power. If the snake god's believers met with an enemy that was beyond their abilities, the evil god's believers would be able to pray to the evil god for divine blessings that exceeded the norm. However, the evil god wouldn't even bother to pay attention to them if they didn't have sufficient benefits. This mortal plane was filled with snake demons and lizard men. The snake god had dozens of believers, so the snake god wouldn't care much for his believers here. If this was the mortal plane, the death of a single high-level priest would be a major loss. Not only would the snake god lose face, but it would also be quite likely that the snake god would help if the snake god's believers in the mortal plane met with a calamity. This place was quite close to the snake god's main body, and it was quite dangerous. Lizard men were dying every day. Although the signal here was quite good, it was almost impossible for the snake god's believers to respond to their prayers. Perhaps this was why the snake god's main body was so important to the snake god's embassy. There weren't many people here, and it was a matter of face. Let's stop here for now. Things have been quite tense recently, so I shouldn't try to die too much. So, when I saw the gigantic cyan blue snake in the sky, my first reaction was that I was hallucinating. My second reaction was that I discovered that my luck had been running out for far too long. It was likely that my luck had been running out for several hundred years already. Damn it, I can't be so unlucky, can I? The situation is tense. Retreat. Let's take the goods and leave first. Due to our many years of tacit understanding, we instantly came to an agreement. I tossed out a sword of light that nailed the lizardman shaman who was holding the heartstone. This time, I didn't miss at all. Little Red, who had just been howling on the ground, instantly stood up and leaped towards the lizardman shaman. She then grabbed the heartstone and swallowed it. Just as she was about to spread her wings and fly away, I unhesitatingly fled first. I could sense that the snake had already locked onto me. Challenging an evil god's main body in an evil god's private mortal plane would be no different from challenging an evil god's main body in a true god's divine kingdom. I didn't want to die so arrogantly. However, the next instant, I was blocked by a figure. It was a female demon general who was more than 3 meters tall. Her black scale armor was covered in scars, and the chain sword she held at her right hand was also covered in blood. She viciously glared at me, as if I was the person who had killed her father. If it wasn't for the scars on her face, she would definitely be considered a beauty. But right now, the viciousness and naked hatred in her eyes made me feel rather confused. Do we know each other? I don't remember offending you. Miss, what's your surname? It's your emotional debt again. Do you even remember the woman you offended? Harlowe's words made me feel rather guilty. When I really tried to compare my past memories with hers, I still didn't find anything. Ka-wen-si. Every single word she squeezed out was filled with intense hatred. Her blood-red eyes were filled with nothing but hatred and regret. So it was all Cavendish's fault. What the hell was wrong with me? How did I get hit like this? Wait a moment. Although we look very similar, take a closer look. I'm a human, while Cavendish is a demon. Before I even finished speaking, countless red chains sealed off the sky. The female demon general unhesitatingly attacked, while wielding her magic sword. Damn it. Even this is related to me. She was already attacking me. What else could I do? Fight. I suddenly unsheathed my ice sword and blocked the formless chain magic sword. The enemy before me gave me a lot of pressure. She wouldn't be an opponent that I could easily deal with. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the snake god didn't seem to intend on interfering. Little Red was also blocked by a deformed demon general. Judging from his strange appearance, he was probably the slaughter maniac demon sailor, the devil general from the first level of the Chaos Abyss. In that case, it was quite obvious who my opponent was when I combined this god equipment that reeked of blood and curses, as well as the countless wailing souls on top of it. Las Nina, the Lord of Curses. The next instant, the entire sky was ignited by holy light. This wasn't an act. It would be incredibly foolish to hold anything back in front of a devil lord. My holy light wings completely exploded, and the ice sword in my hand was replaced by a god equipment warhammer. The holy light I spat out transformed into a sun-like source of light. Holy light, this enemy is worth fighting. There was no need for a reason or an excuse. She was already an enemy to begin with. Since the Devil Lord was already right in front of her, she wouldn't be afraid of anyone if she wanted to fight. Chapter 577. Misfortune always descends from the heavens. I lowered my head and blinked. Even the corners of my eyes hurt from the wind caused by my sword. My opponent this time was indeed quite difficult to deal with. The magic sword Sastia, also known as the snake-tail whipper, was a god equipment, and its effects were right before my very eyes. I could hear the screams of ghosts and wolves. These were the screams of the vengeful spirits that died to this god equipment. This god equipment itself was a type of mental attack that targeted the soul. If you didn't have any defensive abilities in this area, or if you were distracted by it during an intense battle, then you would soon become one of these vengeful spirits. As the battle progressed, the sword would make snake-like sounds and distort, and these vengeful spirits would get closer and closer to your mind. The moment you revealed an opening, the moment you began listening to their past, would be the moment of your death. Yet, this was only the most inconspicuous aspect of this god equipment of slaughter. Perhaps it should be said that far too many lives had died to this sword. Far too much hatred and resentment was wrapped around this sword, which was why it was cursed. Holy light, allow these pitiful souls to return to peace. The light of salvation materialized and fell on my head, turning into a crown of light. The holy light above his head began to radiate in all directions. It was redeeming the dead souls. This was the light of salvation from the Lord of Redemption. The wrong souls that were contaminated by it screamed and fled. They either dissipated on the spot and reincarnated, or were forced back into the divine artifact. Las Nina seemed to notice that her ability was countered. The next instant, she changed her combat style. Her magic sword suddenly shook several times in a row and lengthened yet again. Then all I could see was blood-red blades. Countless chains and blades were everywhere. Numerous black chains sealed off the entire sky. This magic sword was actually capable of creating a sword net that blocked off the entire sky. Holy light, cleanse this cursed magic sword. I loudly shouted for holy light as I threw my battle hammer, which viciously collided with the magic sword's extended blade. After this clash, it was Las Nina's turn to have an unpleasant expression. She could feel that her divine weapon, the demonic sword, was wailing and crying for help. It was actually being permanently weakened with every clash. This is holy light? Finally, Las Nina, who had attacked the moment they met, finally stopped. She spoke for the first time since she met me. However, the answer to her confusion was a spear of holy light that suddenly descended from the clouds and viciously exploded in front of her. Boom! Boom! The continuous explosions showed the powerful attack power. This was the pure holy light. I had missed my holy light spear earlier when I was chasing after Las Nina. However, I had actually thrown it in an arc with my mind control. Now that Las Nina had stopped, I commanded her to charge down from the clouds and suddenly explode in front of Las Nina. Las Nina was engulfed by a violent explosion that blew away the surrounding clouds. I wasn't an idiot who would explain my ability to her. While she was distracted, I would naturally hit her first. A fixed target was much easier to hit than a moving one. At this moment, just as Las Nina was wondering, is this holy light? Do you think I'll stop just because you say so? Where I put my face then? Clang! Suddenly, the pain in my back reminded me that I wasn't the only one who knew how to play dirty tricks. This woman actually launched a sneak attack from behind. The chain sword of the snake's tail extended out from the clouds. Her demonic sword could actually be split up and could even attack automatically after being split up. Are you trying to distract me by talking and then use the snake blades in the clouds to hurt me? Sinister as expected. It's useless. It's useless. However, this was still useless against me. I turned around and grabbed my demonic sword. Holy light flashed 3 times in a row, and all that was left was scrap metal without any spirituality. TSK, a turtle shell. You chose the wrong opponent. Las Nina walked out of the exploding clouds completely unscathed. It would seem that the previous exchange had only been an appetizer for both of us. From a certain standpoint, she had indeed chosen the wrong opponent. At the very least, it would seem that my special abilities countered hers. The most dangerous part about Sastia wasn't its ability to change and extend infinitely, nor was it the souls wailing on it. Rather, it was the blade itself. Sastia's blade seemed to have been corroded by blood, so it wasn't particularly sharp. However, it was actually covered in Devil's Curse art. The bloodstains were actually magical runes created by souls. In the hands of the Lord of Curses, Sastia's demonic sword was especially dangerous. Any physical body touched by Sastia's sword would instantly suffer from aging, soul-sucking, dullness, misfortune, and more than 20 other powerful curses. Even a god would be forcefully corrupted by Sastia's sword. Yet, this was all meaningless to me. Roland, if you're a man, then take off your turtle shell. A beautiful woman's angry rebuke would always be quite powerful. However, I only wanted to laugh at Las Nina's words. Your psychological methods are so bad that I'm wondering if you're a devil or not. You want to take off my armor? Of course I can, but you should first throw down this sword. Then we can test if I'm a man or not. All right then, what I got in response was a magic sword whip that suddenly increased in frequency. It would seem that Las Nina really didn't seem like a devil at all. She was able to explode with just a single sentence. However, such an attack was still completely ineffective. That's right, from the very start, I had the advantage because my full-body dragon scale ice armor, Guardian of Yonya, had evolved to the semi-god equipment level. No matter how vicious a sword's blade was, it would only be fatal if it actually injured someone. I had used half of my abilities in exchange for defense, so it wouldn't be so easy to break through. As long as my armor was broken, I would be undefeatable. Not only that, this living armor also had the ability to repair itself. The longer this battle dragged on, the more obvious my advantage would become. Las Nina was indeed correct when she said that she chose the wrong opponent. She probably saw how thick Little Red's dragon scales were and how high her magic resistance was, which is why she chose me since I wasn't wearing any armor. She didn't expect that I would be able to summon this heavy defensive armor at any time. Meanwhile, Sailor, the Berserker Demon of Slaughter, was also facing a troublesome opponent. A famous veteran would indeed be quite amazing. However, while Sailor could use his fame to suppress others, there is also the risk of information about his abilities being leaked. I had summoned my armor the moment I saw Las Nina's magic sword. Meanwhile, Little Red was extremely experienced in dealing with Sailor's special ability. Sailor, the famous general of the Blood Wars, was just as famous as his physical characteristics. He was able to change the weight of an object just by touching it, making it heavier or lighter. He could even make sturdy armor as fragile as a piece of paper or as sturdy as a city wall. Although nobody knew how he was able to do this, this type of power was definitely the nemesis of melee job classes. It would be even easier for him to deal with gigantic beasts. Nobody would be able to stop him in a chaotic battle. The moment that Little Red recognized her opponent, she unhesitatingly gave up on her stronger dragon form and transformed into her human form. She then began to show off her power as a fire and wind dual magic archmage. Soaring magic, short-range accurate instantaneous movement, dragon wings buff, flame spray, tornado transformation, rattlesnake agitation. The high-speed Little Red used her half-dragon form with dragon wings to show off what it meant to have high mobility and what it meant to be a natural fighter. Little Red's beautiful red figure kept appearing and disappearing in the sky. Every time the clumsy sailor chased after her, he would only see an afterimage. Then, he would be followed by a storm of flames and flames. Sailor had already fallen to the ground twice. If it wasn't for the fact that he was sturdy enough, he would have been smashed to smithereens already. Red dragons had a natural sense of space and aerial combat techniques. Sailor still hadn't been able to touch his opponent. He had been getting beaten up the entire time. Yes, your special ability is quite powerful. You'll be able to kill me as long as you touch me. However, you should catch up to me first. Little Red was using her actions to provoke Sailor. Sailor had already met a highly mobile opponent before. He also had powerful short-range, instantaneous movement magic tools. However, he was hit by Little Red's dragon breath every time he tried to instantaneously teleport. He knew that he couldn't just casually teleport in front of this wind and fire archmage anymore. Little Red's draconic eyes locked onto all the dimensional cracks. Although Sailor was quite tanky, he was about to be cooked if this wind and fire archmage's flames continued to burn. Sailor tried to ask for help from the Lord of Curses, but discovered that the Lord of Curses was also in a stalemate. Now, the two devil lords regretted being so arrogant and caring about their reputation. Why didn't they just bring their entire devil army? I couldn't help but relax when I saw that Little Red still had the advantage. But just as I felt that we had a great advantage, Lost Nina suddenly tossed aside her magic sword. I'm bored, mortal. I'll let you see my true power. Why I'm called the Lord of Curses. Chapter 578. Throw away my sword? Did she really want me to take off my armor and discuss whether or not I was a man? As long as you didn't want to take responsibility, I would welcome that. Cough, cough. Things have been quite tense recently, so I should be more careful. Of course, Lost Nina wouldn't have thrown away her magic sword for the sake of peace. Her magic sword suddenly broke apart in midair into several hundred metal shards that spun in the air. Sword immortal? Floating cannons? That's ridiculous. Although Lost Nina was saying all sorts of things, she was actually on guard. Logically speaking, the attack power of the scattered shards should have decreased. Even if Lost Nina's attack method became more difficult to defend against, it would still be meaningless if she couldn't break through Lost Nina's defense. There wouldn't be any foundational difference. However, Lost Nina was a famous devil lord. How could she possibly only have such a simple trick? The next instant, something inconceivable occurred. All the shards actually shot back at Lost Nina's master. Lost Nina's sword shard stabbed into her flesh, causing blood to fly everywhere. Lost Nina was also stabbed into a bloody mess by her own magic sword. Countless blood-red runes instantly appeared on her physical body, just like the curse on her magic sword. Her physical body rapidly expanded, bringing with it an indescribable power. Curses are the evil intentions of the soul. Jealousy, hatred, anger, and guilt. Words are formless blades, and curses are bloody blades. All curses in the world are nothing but food for me. After completing her transformation, Lost Nina was much larger than before. Her entire body was covered in blood and magical runes. Countless blades were stabbed into her flesh as if they were made of chains. Her right hand now carried a sword that was more than 3 meters long. If one only looked at her physical appearance, she was still humanoid. However, her magic power was completely incomparable to before. An incorporeal shadow appeared behind her. This was the abyss of evil that was currently devouring countless souls. This was the home of venomous worms at the bottom of the abyss. I had never seen such impure magic power before. It was rotten, smelly, slow, and countless negative curses mixed together. The entire sky was dyed in all sorts of colors. Waves of evil began to spread, dyeing the suddenly falling rain black. Every drop of rain was filled with evil, sinful intent. It was as if ghosts were wailing inside. Endless evil and filth polluted the entire world, just like a stinky virus. Just looking at it would make me feel like I was being devoured. Ouch, ouch. When the lizard men below saw this scene, they couldn't take it anymore. Some of them knelt down and vomited, some of them wailed, and some of them instinctively tried to run away. However, there was no difference between the lizard men and the lizard men. As they ran, they turned into skeletons. Those who vomited their internal organs, and those who cried eventually ran dry of blood and tears. Those who reacted quickly blinded themselves and saved their lives for a short period of time. However, the demonic sound entered their ears and the stench entered their nostrils. The best outcome was that they would be crippled for life. The lizard man witch doctor, who had just used up his divine power, knelt on the ground and vomited. Apart from his bloody organs, he also vomited out black and grayish-white human-faced worms. That was the truth of the indescribable cursed object. Curses were the foundational malice of the soul. As the strongest source of malice in the world, Las Nina was able to indiscriminately curse all life and pollute the entire world simply by revealing her true form. Is this the true form of the king of curses? This is really ugly. Las Nina was the one who said this. She was now completely covered in blood. Yes, this appearance is so ugly. That's why everyone who's seen her before. There was no need for me to say anything else. Since she had already revealed her true form, she naturally wouldn't stop until she was dead. They all signed a confidentiality agreement with you? Actually, I know a few good plastic surgery hospitals. I casually made a lame joke, but I was actually smiling wryly in my heart. Just looking at the size of her magic power, she was at least 3 times stronger than before. Previously, she was only 1 level higher than me. Now, she was at the level of being able to completely crush me. I kept having an ominous feeling. Since Las Nina had revealed her true form that even she believed to be incredibly ugly, I naturally had to take her down at all costs. As expected of that person's older brother. You're just as skilled at making people angry as him. The Devil Lord, who had undergone such a huge transformation, felt uncomfortable every second. She had no intentions of chatting. The next instant, her figure flashed as she attacked. Las Nina's shadow disappeared in the blink of an eye. I could only sense that she was constantly approaching. Even my soul vision couldn't lock onto her in time. So fast, before I could even react, Las Nina's sword viciously slashed at my face. Even now, there were no spatial ripples at all. This wasn't teleportation. This was pure physical strength. Las Nina's sword furiously slashed at my body repeatedly. Direct attacks, side attacks, whipping attacks, piercing attacks, sweeping attacks, heavy attacks from the front, hammering attacks from the back of my head, piercing my eyes, piercing my ears, and hitting my groin. Every part of my body was being attacked. It was as if 8 giant snakes were furiously tearing at my physical body. Let's see just how long your turtle shell can last. Las Nina was trying to forcefully break through the turtle shell, as well as test out the weaknesses of this armor. If this was an ordinary man-made armor, it would definitely have weak points such as connections or air vents. However, Las Nina's attempts were destined to be fruitless. The Guardian of the Night was a defensive armor created from the power of her bloodline. Every part of the armor was created simultaneously. How could it possibly have any obvious weaknesses? Holy light! I had just opened my mouth to say something when Las Nina's sword almost stabbed into my mouth. Las Nina's high-speed attacks were like an endless ocean, coming wave after wave. I had no chance to counterattack at all, and so I decided to close my eyes. Have you given up? Come on, counterattack, you coward! Las Nina's hysterical screams echoed in my ears as she suddenly punched me in the stomach. The penetrative power caused me to spit out blood. But even so, I still grit my teeth and close my eyes. 1 attack, 2 attacks, 100 attacks, 1,000 attacks. Finally, my dragon armor began to crack. This meant that my regenerative abilities were no longer able to keep up with my destructive power. My dragon armor could completely collapse at any moment. Coward, just hide like a turtle and die. The berserk Las Nina was no longer able to control her emotions. She had tossed aside her original plans. Right now, her only thought was to tear apart this bastard before her. But at this moment, I opened my eyes. One eye was black, while the other eye was white. The other eye was black, while the other eye was white. It was as if they were 2 halves of the Tai Chi symbol. Judgment. My words were cold and emotionless, as if I were a high and mighty God's judgment on the mortal world. It had nothing to do with me or the world. Las Nina was guilty, so I was judging her. The stare of the hell god had been forced to its limits. I had to use this incredibly dangerous ace up my sleeve. Lost Nina paused when I stared at her, just like a frog being stared at by a snake. Then the next instant, her entire body started bleeding profusely. It was as if she had just received the punishment of endless purgatory in that 1 second. Nobody knew what Lost Nina had seen in that instant. The normally fearless Lord of Curses was now terrified. Her face was completely pale, and all the magical runes on her body had lost their luster. Her sweat and blood mixed together, and she didn't even have the time to stop her blood from spraying out. It was no wonder that she felt so uncomfortable. After the stare of the Hell God was created, the stare of the Hell God had improved by leaps and bounds. The stare of the Hell God was a judgment that originated from the soul. Every life had two sides. If there was good, then there would be evil. Even a most heartless individual would have a shred of conscience in their hearts. And the stare of the Hell God was a natural talent that allowed one to separate good from evil. Their conscience would transform into a judge that would judge the sins of an evil soul and punish them accordingly. It would be impossible for anyone to lie to themselves. It would be impossible to dodge an attack from oneself. The more sins one had committed in the past, the karmic attacks would be unavoidable, and there was no way to avoid them. Perhaps only an instant had passed in our eyes. But in Lost Nina's senses, perhaps thousands of years had passed in purgatory. "Sailor, let's go." The next instant, Sailor unhesitatingly ran away in panic. Sailor, who was at a disadvantage, also unhesitatingly retreated after seeing that even his master had been defeated. Extreme fatigue swept over me. I really wanted to sleep right away. Unfortunately, the gigantic existence above me hadn't attacked yet. I still needed to be on guard against it. "Snake God Voka, you're not fighting and you're not retreating. Why are you doing this?" Chapter 579. The cloth wrapped around his eyes, but the blood continued to seep down. His senses were completely sealed, but there was a world of black and white. Black was death, white was life, black was evil, white was good. However, I could sense that these were just colors that had been casually smeared by a brush. The borders were blurry, and the colors were faintly fading away. It was as if I could easily change it with a single swipe of my hand, changing life and death, reversing good and evil, and then you'll die. You'll die because you asked for it. The silly cat's retorts were still as exasperating as ever. Still, she wasn't wrong. If I really changed the definition of life and death as I pleased, that would be no different from forcefully taking over the Creator Goddess authority. I would likely self-destruct on the spot the very next second. The stare of the Hell God was far too dangerous, no matter if it was to my opponents or to myself. This wasn't an ability that mortals should be able to control. At the very least, before becoming a semi-god, using it every time would be equivalent to going berserk. Using it so casually would be equivalent to suicide. And the first time this trump card appeared, the opponent was already not simple. The Devil Lord stood at the apex of all devils. Every single one of them was incredibly difficult to deal with. They were famed experts in all dimensions, and ordinary human semi-gods would be completely helpless before them. Even though I had the advantage of suppressing his abilities, I wouldn't be able to fight him head-on before I completed my first myth-ranked weapon. That was why I could only use this trump card that I hadn't fully mastered yet. With such a powerful opponent as his target, the Nether God's eyes were overloaded and out of control from the very beginning. If the battle had continued for a while longer, his eyeballs would probably have exploded. Any type of supernatural interference would depend on the user's basic energy level. The absolute difference in magic power meant that it would be impossible for me to kill Lost Nina just by relying on my species' natural talents. It would be impossible for an ox cart to pull a train. In the end, the ox cart would overload and become useless. Fortunately, Lost Nina had been scared off like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. Once she calmed down, she would probably be even more difficult to deal with. But now, the inhuman pain in my eyes reminded me of the price of victory. Not only would I be unable to use my stare of the Hell God until I completely recovered, but I would also have to experience living as a blind person. The surroundings were eerily silent. I couldn't move around as I pleased, so I was bored. Suddenly, I had a thought that I had been accumulating for a long time. Perhaps this was my chance. He covered his eyes and bared his upper body. He stretched out his wings and lowered his head to reveal an ice crystal skeleton. He hugged the skeleton with one hand and stroked a small yellow flower with the other. Then, he turned his head around. I've been imprisoned for 10,000 years and expelled from my hometown. Now, you actually dare to trespass into my territory. You're courting death. Yes, since he was blind, he naturally had to take the opportunity to cosplay as Brother Egg. He seems to be even more unfortunate than you. The system's retort made me feel helpless. Was it really that easy to guess? In the next instant, a mask with 8 eyes appeared on his face. He was blind, who wielded a sword with both hands. Your sword is my sword, and my sword is still my sword. That's a typo, right? Also, that guy isn't blind. This level of difficulty was far too low. I thought for a moment before putting on a cloak and a transparent ice mirror, revealing an appearance of contemplating life. If it's for eternal justice, I'm willing to bear all the infamy and eternal crimes. That's a villain, right? If you're cosplaying Grim Reaper, you should at least wear a captain's coat, right? And so, I wrote the word mind's eye on a piece of cloth as I held a shield in one hand and a spear in the other. Still a villain. Still an unpopular joke that reveals his age. All right then, the next instant, I put on a red archmage robe and held a magic staff as I revealed a sunny smile. Even more revealing of his age, but he's still a villain and at the level of a final boss. Are there no good people among blind people? I did my best to think and came up with a blind ninja. A blind ninja be a blind samurai, a half-blind samurai, be samurai pretending to be blindy. Finally, I thought of a righteous blind person from an old anime that revealed his age and immediately started taking off his clothes. Why are you taking off your clothes? Are you an exhibitionist? TSK. If he doesn't take off his clothes, how is he going to cosplay as that cockroach whose clothes will be ripped off the moment the fight starts? By the way, isn't he always ripping off his clothes to show off the master-level tattoo on his back? After thinking about it for a while, I came up with a rather useless rule. If a blind person appeared in an anime, the majority of them will be male villains. The number of blind people who appeared as the main character could be counted on one hand, and most of them would be sword-wielding samurai. Why would a blind person choose a melee job class? Weren't they afraid that they wouldn't be able to see the blade of a sword and cut themselves? Since I have such a rare opportunity, perhaps I should change my appearance as well. I think there's a one-eyed blind samurai who looks really cool. Why don't I try? But, by the way, Harlois, forget about holding a sword in each hand. Isn't he afraid that his mouth will be covered in blood if he has another sword in his mouth? Right. How is he able to speak while biting a sword in his mouth without leaking air? Don't ask me. You're so stupid. If you dare to make such an appearance, don't blame me for pretending that I don't know you. The silly cat yawned lazily. After such a difficult battle, she was rather fatigued. During the battle, I had extracted a large amount of mana from her in order to regenerate my armor. She had basically become my mana pool. Fortunately, I had 2 times the mana pool at the beginning of myth rank. Otherwise, my dragon armor would have been shattered long ago. And even if my defense hadn't been broken, I was still in pain all over, with wounds all over my body. Even with my armor, my magic sword attacks aren't that easy to deal with. I was making fun of Harlois out of boredom, but I was actually finding joy in her pain. The holy light was currently healing her own wounds. And this place that we were currently in wasn't a safe place at all. This was a holy temple filled with white-robed, snake-headed servants. The murals and sculptures on the walls all had the same theme, praising the venerated snake god Voka. Only after we defeated the devil's ambush did we have the energy to deal with snake god Voka, who had been watching us all this time. Actually, I was already quite glad that he hadn't done anything yet, or, more accurately speaking, I found it inconceivable. But what was even more astonishing was that not only did he not show any hostility, he even invited us to his temple as guests. He even offered to provide us with assistance and teleportation portals. Chaos and the Chaos Abyss shared the same rule. It would already be a great favor if the Chaos Abyss didn't take advantage of your predicament. I was rather unable to see through Snake God Voka's intentions. From start to finish, he hadn't shown any hostility at all. In fact, now that I thought about it, it was his appearance that reminded us that we were being targeted. Although it sounded ridiculous, Voka had indeed used his actions to show the Chaos Abyss the rare and precious kindness. In that case, it was only natural that I would listen to what he wanted to say. All right then, to be honest, since Voka had invited us, considering the difference in power levels between us. Yep, the worst-case scenario would be that we would simply run away, so there was no foundational difference. So we gladly accepted his invitation. Since Voka had moved us to his temple, he was also kind enough to give us time and space to take care of the injured. That was why we had the free time to do all this. Meanwhile, Little Red had already begun eating and drinking to her heart's content. The leftover meat and bones had piled up into a small mountain. The snake person's servant who had been serving her food was already half-dead tired. For dragons, it wouldn't be a problem for them to replenish their energy as long as they had enough food and sleep. Although Little Red had always had the advantage in battle, she had actually used up a lot of energy when fighting against the Blood War General. Not only did she have to use a fighting style that she wasn't skilled at, she also had to constantly be on high alert. She had been kiting quite elegantly, but she didn't have the killing power to end the battle. She was constantly on high alert, and if Sailor managed to get close to her just once, there wouldn't be a second time. It would probably be quite tiring and frustrating for her to use a fighting style that she wasn't skilled at for an extended period of time. The foundational difference between Little Red and other dragons was that she didn't have the so-called dignity of dragons. She was quite skilled at learning other species' specialties and advantages. If it were any other dragon, they wouldn't have learned all those random tricks. Instead, they would have used the powerful physical bodies that dragons were most proficient in to fight against Sailor. Everyone knew that fighting against Sailor, who was capable of controlling the quality of matter, would be no different from suicide. Alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. Just meat alone won't be enough. I need to replenish my mana. So alcohol could replenish mana as well? This was the first time I'd heard about this. What a joke. An Archmage's #1 priority was to ban alcohol. Alcohol would make one's head hot, which would be the equivalent of making one's mana go out of control. I shook my head. Since Little Red was interested in alcohol, there was no point in saying anything else. If I got too close to her, I would be forced to drink alcohol. It would be terrible if a banquet really happened. As an injured person, I would need to ban alcohol for a while. The light of salvation, which healed and dispelled everything on my body, kept circling around me. I felt a cooling sensation coming from all the thousands of wounds on my body. However, it would still take some time to dispel the curse that had seeped into my flesh and blood. The foundational difference in mana made me, the victor, have to taste the pain of a loser. I'm sorry, there's no alcohol in this palace. Our king is... I paused mid-sentence in surprise as a handsome white-robed youth walked into the palace. His black hair reached all the way to his waist. Judging from his mana, he was definitely Snake God Voka. Even though Snake God Voka was still in his half-snake form when facing off against the Devil Lord, he chose to transform into his human form when meeting with us. This was a sign of good will towards us, as well as a sign of how much importance he placed on what he was about to discuss with us. A single statement or small action could represent many things. Many thoughts flashed through my mind, but I rejected all of them. Finally, an inconceivable possibility appeared on the table. Although it sounds ridiculous, this is the only possibility after all the impossibilities are eliminated. In that case, he really did find the right person to talk to me. I couldn't help but reveal a brilliant smile as I thought about how Voka had a favor to ask of me. If it really was as I thought, perhaps I would be able to make a good deal out of him and have a friendly chat. Chapter 580. Any kindness has a reason and a price. Although this sounded like I was measuring the heart of a gentleman with a yardstick of a villain, in a damned place like the Chaos Abyss, kindness without a reason was far more unsettling than malice. The devil's departure was only temporary. Lasnina had only been mentally injured. Once she recovered, she would come back sooner or later. Considering how she had suffered this time, I would definitely bring 1 or 2 more devil lords or even the entire devil army with me next time. I think that our top priority right now is to hurry up and escape. Why does His Highness Voka want to see us? I refuse to believe that she would be able to find us as long as our destination wasn't exposed. Why don't you have more fun? I can arrange a tour guide for you. Have more fun in the Chaos Abyss? If it wasn't for the fact that Snake God Voka was the one saying this, and that we weren't currently in his divine kingdom, I would have flipped the table already. Could you at least speak like a human? Was this really a place where it was possible to organize a tour route? I could understand that he hadn't spoken like a human for far too long, so he was trying to find something to say. However, could he consider reality? Traveling in the Chaos Abyss, which was filled with mud and swamps. Perhaps it really would work. As long as we filmed a show about survival in the wild, we would have to prevent any prey from devouring the entire filming crew. Snake God Voka would also have to protect us. Cough, there's no point in being polite to begin with, so I'll just get straight to the point. While my mind was already racing, and I was really starting to plan out how to profit from this tour route, Voka was the first to stop talking about it. I hope that you can help me establish a connection with the gods of Hades. As I expected, in an instant, I revealed a troubled expression. Of course, it wasn't really awkward. Establishing a connection with the gods of Hades wouldn't be difficult at all for me. But if things were too easy, how could I use this opportunity to extort and show how important I was? Abyss Snake God Voka wanted to join the Hades faction? This seemed inconceivable, but it was actually quite understandable. Over the past few years, many gods had joined the Chaos Abyss. What was even more inconceivable was that most of these gods were chaos evil gods. But if one thought about it carefully, it was only natural. When there were only 2 factions in the world, every single person or country would have to choose a side. Not only would they have to express their loyalty, they would also have to express their hatred towards the opposing faction. Otherwise, they would be considered an anomaly that couldn't be tolerated by either faction, and they would. All right, we all know the result. When there was a victor between the 2 camps, and there was only 1 camp left, the victor would divide and seize the spoils of war. There was nothing much to say. Just take a look at the hundreds of wars that a certain country on Earth had created after the Cold War, and you would know. When totalitarianism lost its restraints, when all ambitions could be realized at will, when the treasuries of other countries were no longer guarded, when one person was both a player and a referee, there was no need to say what would happen. But when there were only 3 major factions in the world, many situations would be foundationally different. A triangular structure might seem incredibly unstable, but it was actually incredibly flexible. Any angle could support the triangular structure. Minor changes in power and slight adjustments in the angle wouldn't cause the entire structure to collapse. Many of the previous Chaos Evil gods had once been members of the Order Gods, but when they left their divine positions for various reasons, they discovered that even though the world was large, they had nowhere else to go. In the end, they could only choose to take root in the Chaos Abyss and become a member of the Chaos Abyss. This was the disadvantage of having 2 factions. It was either you or me, black or white. There was no room for ambiguous choices. But now, the Chaos Evil gods that joined the Hades faction weren't truly members of the Hades faction. They were instead members of a third party. Their goal was only to break free from the Order and Chaos Abyss control over them. The Hades faction was more than happy to provide this type of protection. This was one of the goals that the Hades faction pursued. Most of the new third-party members were Chaos Evil gods. It wasn't that the low and middle order gods were doing quite well. It was that they were being controlled even more deeply. Sincerity. These were simple words, but they were quite thought-provoking. I was personally asking for an intermediary fee, as well as the Hades faction asking Voka to express his sincerity and determination to break free from the Chaos Abyss. There had to be a reason for your betrayal, right? Why didn't the Chaos faction treat you well? Shouldn't you at least tell me? Voka revealed a bitter smile when he heard this. Light flashed through his green eyes, and he seemed to be filled with an indescribable sorrow. The current generation probably only knows that I, Voka, am the snake god and the god of poison. What they don't know is that I was originally a gigantic white snake at the foot of Hainer Mountain, the local guardian god of the forest. I used to be the nature totem god, as well as a member of the nature faction. Not to mention, even I didn't know that the nature faction was once the #1 god faction that leaned towards the order faction. The nature faction's main god was the famous Earth Mother Goddess. Voka told me about how he had been betrayed during the Holy War and how he had fallen from being the guardian god of forests and snake men to becoming the god of poison. Even the snake men under his protection had been stripped of their reason and conscience and were now known as snake demons. This wasn't anything new. In the end, it was nothing more than a holy war where a powerful species was reduced to a third-rate species. Even their guardian gods were exiled. In the end, they could only become level lords of the Chaos Abyss. I didn't say a single word as I listened to Voka's story with great interest, as if I was listening to a story. Actually, I was indeed treating this as a story. No matter how moving or complicated the story was, most of the people involved were already dead. What else could I do apart from treat this story as entertainment? Also, Voka's story was obviously far too biased. He even said it wasn't my fault throughout the entire story. He made himself sound like the #1 tragic male lead in the world, which made his story even more doubtful. The entire story was about how Voka had been misunderstood and exiled by the nature faction. He was then forced to settle down in the Chaos Abyss. Now that he was sick of this place, he wanted to move to another place to live. At any rate, everyone else was in the wrong. There was no need for me to argue about this. The truth of this story wasn't that important. The Hades faction and I needed a reason, and Voka gave me a reason. That was enough. As for whether or not this reason was real, actually, both sides knew that the past wasn't important at all. What was important was what Voka would do in the future. And saying anything about this would be meaningless. Time would prove everything. Practical actions and exchanges of benefits would help establish a new alliance. Of course, if I spoke on behalf of Voka, the main gods of the Hades faction would pay more attention to this alliance. This alliance would be established much faster, but that was all. Voka was quite generous. He accidentally told me that I lacked myth-ranked materials. He opened up his treasury and allowed me to choose 2 items of my choosing as payment for acting as the middleman. And I accidentally asked him about the devils. Even though we clearly didn't have any grudges against each other, why were they suddenly trying to kill us? About that? I think they intend to use you as a hostage in exchange for Ilmigia from Cavendish. What's the matter with you? All right, at that moment, my face was probably twisted. Haha, a good older brother is one who occasionally takes the blame for his younger brother. The silly cat wasn't even sleeping anymore. She was rolling around on the ground in laughter. I picked her up and casually tossed her into a nearby pool of water. My negotiation with Voka ended here. He definitely had his own expectations for being willing to give up all his wealth in the Chaos Abyss. Perhaps he wanted the snake demons to be able to live in the mortal plane, or perhaps he wanted to reclaim his divine concept of Forest Guardian. But none of this was something he should be discussing with me. I was happy to pretend that I didn't know anything. As for Voka's treasury, I didn't have much expectations for it. Most of the ancient gods here probably had god equipment in their possession, but they definitely wouldn't be willing to give it to me. Would he really give up all his treasures just because he said so? There would be a limit to how naive I could be. At most, it would only be an ordinary mortal's treasury. If I specifically asked for something, it would be difficult for Voka to refuse. But since he was aimless, it would actually be easier to fool him. After all, I didn't know what treasures he had. He would definitely have poison-related treasures, and he would definitely have plenty of treasures related to snake men. But what use would I have? This was fine as well. But just as Voka and I were about to start a banquet, he suddenly furrowed his eyebrows. Your Highness Roland, perhaps you should speed up your journey. Just now, 2 more devil lords entered this mortal plane. Chapter 581. Are devil lords so worthless these days? There was no need to doubt snake god Voka's information. He was the master of this dimension with countless spies serving him. He also had countless connections to the dimensional laws of this dimension. It would be very difficult for anything to escape his notice. However, there were only 5 devil lords in total. With so many devil lords attacking me, it was likely that they wouldn't even be able to defend their own territory. Now, 3 more devil lords were chasing after me. The situation would definitely become even worse. It was likely that they would lose several levels in a row. Should I feel honored that they paid such a high price just to capture me? We can't stay here any longer. This was the common understanding that didn't need to be said. If we waited here, we wouldn't have much time left. If the devils really came here, things would become even more interesting. Since time was limited, I didn't bother acting. I directly asked Voka to help me. At the very least, he would arrange a safe path for me. At the same time, I would fulfill my promise. Voka definitely had a dimensional teleportation portal here. In that case, there was no need for me to return to the Limestone Dwarf tribe. Now obviously wasn't the time to waste time. Although it was a pity that I wouldn't be able to receive payment from the dwarves, it wouldn't be too much of a loss with Voka's compensation. Voka also directly expressed his goodwill. He asked a divine servant to arrange a teleportation portal for us while having someone take us to his treasury to receive our payment. Even so, I still didn't tell him our true destination. I only told him that we were going to the 102nd level of the Chaos Abyss. Didn't we have a good negotiation? Why don't you trust him? Little Red asked as she rubbed her stomach and picked her teeth as we walked through an exquisite corridor filled with white clouds. She looked at all the snake god's achievements carved into the white jade walls around us. This isn't a question of whether or not I trust him. It's only natural for me to be cautious. Our value isn't much higher than the devil's, and Voka isn't that loyal. Do you really think that the Devil Lord would need to lie to the devils and offend them for our sake? He'll definitely do us a favor and sell us out. After all, there's no way we'll come back to the Chaos Abyss to take revenge on him for such a small matter. The 102nd level that I was currently talking about matched up with the dwarves' information. Although there were only 2 levels of difference, there were actually 2 levels of difference. That meant that there were 2 different worlds. It would take quite a bit of effort to find the 102nd level. Oh, Little Red didn't take it to heart. She was just asking casually, then turned her attention to the snake man who was leading the way. I felt helpless. She had just casually asked me a question, and I had to explain so much seriously. I felt a little silly. It was the same in the past. She and Adam didn't care about anything other than the fun of the adventure itself. They didn't care about the messy schemes involved. This wasn't a big deal. It was enough for the leader to put in more effort. However, these 2 were extremely good at stirring up trouble. After stirring up trouble, they would act recklessly. Marguerite and I would always have to clean up the mess for them. Not only did he not die after repeatedly causing trouble, he even met benefactors in his fortuitous encounters and obtained training, becoming stronger and stronger. Could this be the legendary main character's fate? Wherever he went, there would always be a disaster. But from the perspective of the people involved, no matter how one looked at it, they seemed like a lucky brat. Could it be that those so-called heroes who were born with historical missions were also a group of extremely lucky brats? Yep. Only by stirring up trouble would one grow faster. Those who were unlucky or didn't grow stronger quickly enough would all die. Those who were lucky and talented would become the main character. My mind wandered as I followed the snake man leading the way. We strolled through the corridors and stairs leading to the next palace. Since there was still enough time, I didn't act rashly. The scenery along the way was quite nice. The palaces seemed simple due to their natural geomancy. However, their designs were unique, beautiful, and elegant. They were classical, yet not overly extravagant. They would be worth visiting even as a tourist attraction. The palaces were built along a mountain. A long river ran through the entire divine kingdom. The god servants and god envoys lived along the river. A large, dense forest took up 70% of the divine kingdom surface area. It was so obvious that Voka favored the forest. I was starting to believe that Voka had once been the guardian god of the forest. Standing on the stairs, I could see the mountains and plains. Not far away was a giant waterfall that cascaded down from a cliff that was thousands of meters tall. The sound of the water sounded like thunder when I got closer. After turning a corner, I saw that the waterfall really was right in front of me. It was a barrier that descended from the sky that blocked the stairs. I frowned. The waterfall had blocked the path. There was no path to the stairs. Let's see what that meant. Your Highness Roland, please come this way. This is the most majestic scenery in our divine kingdom. When I got closer, I discovered that there was actually a cave that was several dozen meters wide and 5 or 6 meters tall in between the waterfall. This was the entrance to the next path. Being able to create a path through a 1,000-ton waterfall was truly amazing. However, from a god's perspective, this wouldn't even be considered a so-called desperate situation. The snake man was about to enter the cave, but I stopped. What type of gigantic beast skeleton is this? It was impossible for me to completely trust Voka. Ever since I entered this divine kingdom, Harlow's incarnation had been responsible for keeping watch and being on guard. Just now, Harlow's shared with me a view of the scenery from the sky. The incarnation of a bird was thousands of meters high in the sky. When looking down from above, a human would seem as tiny as a grain of rice. However, a gigantic dragon skeleton was abnormally eye-catching. The dragon skeleton was constantly being battered by the waterfall. This gigantic white skeleton was as white as jade, and its gigantic body blocked the unstoppable waterfall without moving at all. 100 meters? 1,000 meters? That's comparable to the tiger god. In most situations, the size of a dragon's was directly proportional to their power level. Although a small dragon might not necessarily be smaller than a large dragon, it was already unimaginable for a dragon skeleton to be this large. It was obvious that this was the skeleton of a super powerful supreme immemorial dragon that far surpassed any ordinary supreme immemorial dragon. I could imagine just how powerful this dragon skeleton must have been when it was alive. It was likely that even the supreme immemorial dragons in Dragon World would be nothing in front of it. I was rather tempted. If I could use such a gigantic dragon skeleton as material, I could create an incredibly powerful superbone dragon. However, after thinking about it, I gave up on this idea. This dragon skeleton was far too ancient, and it had been slowly purified by a god's divine power in my divine kingdom. There wasn't much negative energy left in it. If that was all, it would still be possible to save it. However, it just so happened that it was being washed by the waterfall, and the water itself had a certain amount of purifying properties. At this point, I was no longer interested in the dragon skeleton's resentment. It would be far too difficult to revive it. When considering how I would fight in the future, it didn't seem very meaningful to pursue a gigantic war machine. In the end, I gave up on asking Voka for the dragon skeleton. Suddenly, Little Red, who had been absent-minded all this time, stopped what she was doing. She seemed to be interested in watching the rainbow created by the waterfall splashes. However, I heard her hurried words. "Roland, don't hesitate to obtain this dragon skeleton at all costs. This is the skeleton of the owner of that dragon heart. If I obtain it, it should be no problem for me to progress in power level." I paused in surprise for a moment when I heard this, but then I was overjoyed. Humans weren't the only ones in this world who could improve themselves through training. The Dark Elves' shadow dancers, the Wood Elves' natural archers, and the Beastmen's berserkers were all famous for having powerful, unique job classes. So-called job classes and power level advancement were all cultivation paths left behind by previous generations. It was quite normal for a species to have a job class that was suitable for their species' natural talents. Even the ogres were capable of producing ogre mages and shamans. How could dragons, the strongest species of all, not have any job classes? Indeed, dragons could become stronger as time passed. However, there were also many powerful individuals who actively pursued power and opened up their own paths. Primordial dragon gods, supreme immemorial dragons, and so on. However, dragons were different from ordinary human job classes. To begin with, dragons' combat was based on their physical bodies. Their power level advancement was more like a physical evolution, a foundational change in their bodies. Dragon skin carving was a type of battle dragon who wore magic rune armor all over their bodies. They were similar to the human warrior monks, but they were famous across the universe for their superior defensive abilities. Their magic runes on their skin could even provide powerful magic support. Blood berserk dragons were the berserkers of the dragon race. They abandoned their useless wings and evolved to have even stronger fangs and claws. They pursued the strongest melee combat ability, and they had the ability to go berserk, which was definitely more terrifying than the beastmen. Guardian dragons were eternal dragons who abandoned their wealth and useless vanity in order to obtain eternal life. They were magnificent and mighty, but they rarely fought. Their abilities were a secret, but every single one of them was a famous major individual in Dragon City. These three types of dragons were all quite common in power level advancement. Actually, Little Red's mother had transformed into an Inferno dragon. This could also be considered a type of power level advancement. A Inferno Red dragon would obtain the ability to demonize. The dragon flames that they spat out would become corrosive, and they would even be able to summon cannon fodder from the lower planes. However, after transforming into an Inferno dragon, Molly's abilities were greatly reduced. She lost her outstanding fire control, fire resistance, and combat abilities as a red dragon. Molly was beaten up even worse by Little Red. Many dragons discovered that they were unable to improve in power level anytime soon, so they would stack their racial talents on top of each other's job class. This would give them an effect of 1 + 1 equals more than 3. Actually, humans had similar power level advancements as well. For example, demon warlocks and dragon bloodline warlocks would add the characteristics of demons and dragons to their physical bodies. In theory, this was the same as the power level advancement of dragons. However, the effects would be vastly different. Compared to human power level advancements, dragons' power level advancement represented a change in their very essence and evolution. They would have to pay more and change even more. It could be said that a dragon would be a completely different species from the previous dragon species after power level advancement. In fact, there would even be the ridiculous issue of reproductive isolation. Little Red had previously learned magic from a human archmage. This actually didn't count as a power level advancement. However, as far as I knew, she had long since met the requirements for power level advancement. She also had several powerful power level advancement materials and preparations. It was just that she wasn't interested in ordinary power level advancements. Rather than having her power level advancement too early and having her future development limited, it would be far better to simply sharpen her foundation and create her own path. I also agreed with Little Red's choice. She could also improve herself by cultivating wind and fire magic. There was no need for her to randomly choose a power level advancement to limit herself. It was obvious that no matter if she became a carving skin dragon, a blood berserk dragon, or a guardian dragon, she would gain as much as she would lose. At the very least, it would be unavoidable that her natural talent for fire control would greatly decrease. It was even possible that she would become weaker. At any rate, dragons are already strong enough without power level advancement. They can cultivate their own element magic for the rest of their lives. There's no need for them to forcefully power level advancement. Yet Little Red was saying that she had already found a way to power level advancement. This doubtlessly meant that she had already discovered the dragon god's path through dragon blood and dragon bones and was greatly tempted by it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Only the Chaos Abyss will have such an opportunity. This was the Chaos Abyss. Although it was incredibly dangerous, it was also filled with opportunities. Far too many powerful individuals had come here with their dreams in pursuit of opportunities. However, as they died here, their dreams became opportunities for others. Fallen gods, lost god equipment, and the remains of a certain myth-ranked individual. Compared to the mortal plane's peace and tranquility, the endless chaos abyss also represented immeasurable opportunities and hope. Perhaps one could suddenly rise up or fall forever with a single thought. Little Red's standards were extraordinarily high. Her foundational power level was also terrifyingly high. Even without power level advancement, Little Red was able to beat up Molly, who had already broken through twice, into a sorry state and had to run away. Any power level advancement that Little Red was interested in would definitely be something she liked. I had been working on my own power level advancement, yet I had mysteriously helped Little Red with her power level advancement. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but since such an excellent opportunity had appeared before me, how could I possibly miss it? Originally, Little Red had improved the least over the past few years. This wasn't because she hadn't been working hard. The reason was quite simple and convincing. Her starting point was far too high, while the dragons improve far too slowly. It was only natural that they would grow slower. Most of Little Red's improvements weren't due to foundational changes in power level, but rather due to changes in fighting style. Now that there was such an excellent opportunity to improve her foundational power level, as a true brother, or perhaps a true sister, I would naturally fight for this opportunity to the very end. What if he doesn't give it to you? Then steal it. Do you still remember the dwarves' dimensional doors coordinates? Let's meet up there. Little Red nodded in satisfaction as she went back to enjoying the scenery. As for scamming, negotiating with him, that would naturally be up to me. Actually, I can introduce you to a dwarven construction team. They can help you build a safe and beautiful dimensional door. And so, I began my journey of bargaining with Voka. Then, as I chatted, I want to look for Voka again. Chapter 582. Son, raise up the dust of the desert. You seem to be able to have fun wherever you go. TSK, the Chaos Abyss is such a damn place. I'm happy being poor. Although I said the appropriate lines, the scene before me really made me happy being poor. This was already the second week since I left the snake god's mortal plane. However, I missed that damp and dark swamp. This was the complete opposite of the death swamp. This was a golden desert. The sky was blue, and the ground was golden. Every time I stepped on the sand, it would sink. No matter where I went, everything would be the same color. It was as if there was nothing here apart from white clouds and endless yellow sand. I wanted to ask Voka for that dragon bone, but he was quite free and easy. He didn't even ask why we wanted it and directly gave it to us. I didn't need to carry out my original plan to steal it. I didn't need to offend the snake god, so I now had another enemy who wanted to kill me. I heaved a sigh of relief. Little Red, however, was quite regretful. It would seem that she had been cooped up for far too long. Now that she didn't have to act like a dignified elder, she directly degenerated into a naughty child. But when I thought about it, it was only natural that Voka didn't care about dragon bones. He didn't have that dragon's heart as a key, nor did he have any intentions of learning undead magic. These dragon bones were probably nothing more than decorations to him. And if his negotiations with the Hades gods went well, it was likely that he would have to move away. In that case, rather than tossing these clumsy and useless items away, he might as well give them to us as a favor. System, how much longer will she need? Won't she fail? Considering her accumulation, the probability of her failing is less than 1%. I became even more nervous when I heard this. Even the silly cat couldn't bear to watch anymore. Mises isn't a jinx like you. A 1% failure rate is a 100% failure rate. Stop being so nervous. If you get involved, you might drag down her luck stat. That would truly be a tragedy. Actually, I couldn't be blamed for being overly nervous. Dragon's power levels were all quite strange to begin with. I had heard of even the most ridiculous ones, but I had never seen anything as strange as Little Red's. It was said that the carving skin dragon had to carve magic runes on all the skin on its body. It was said that the most perfect ritual was to take the skin of a powerful prey and sew it on its own body. Not to mention that it was a huge project, just thinking about it was painful. It was no wonder that they were super resistant to beatings. It was possible that their pain nerves had been damaged during the ritual. The blood berserk dragons wanted to give up on their wings, and in that case, they would have to chop them off. I heard that their wings were the most sensitive parts of their bodies, comparable to certain vital parts of a human's body. Cough. Don't worry about how I knew about the most sensitive parts of dragons. At any rate, I didn't really understand this ritual. It was said that the dragons who went through this ritual would greatly increase their speed, and they would come and go like the wind. Their claws and teeth would become as sharp as swords, and they would be able to create a hole with every stab. Could this be the dragon's version of the Sunflower Manual? If these two conditions were still within the realm of understanding, then the requirement for the Dragon of Conservation to advance to the next rank was to devour all of his treasures and swear to give up all of his personal property. This was even more incomprehensible. Even if you wanted to abandon your personal property, you shouldn't do it this way. You just have to abandon your personal property. Isn't it enough for you to swallow all of your treasures? Aren't you afraid of gastric prolapse and indigestion? Even if you don't want them, you could just give them to me. Perhaps Little Red's advancement ritual wouldn't be too ridiculous because of these strange precedents. Right now, I had an additional backpack in my luggage. Inside the backpack was a dark green dragon egg with red spots. After Little Red confirmed her advancement, she actually returned to her dragon egg. It was evident that Little Red was currently incredibly weak. This was probably the weakest she had ever been in her entire life. I felt a tremendous amount of pressure on me. If I accidentally dropped my dragon egg, Little Red probably wouldn't forgive me even if she became a ghost. Pressure? Who was the one who buried your egg in the sand just now? See if the rumors about the desert being able to turn an egg into a fried egg are true or not. The silly cat's comment didn't give me any pressure at all. I was just testing out the rumors. It wasn't like I was actually going to cook the egg, right? It was said that griffins laid eggs as well. In that case, vulture demons as well. My imagination ran wild as I looked at the vulture demons circling above my head. Saliva, saliva. It's just that I haven't eaten in 3 days. Is there really a need to be like this? Yes, I was quite hungry, so hungry that I was about to faint. It wasn't that we didn't bring enough food with us. It was that after we left the snake god's mortal plane, not only did we throw away all of our food, we even burned all of our clothes. The reason? Just the poison god's reputation alone made me unhesitatingly throw away all of my daily necessities, especially anything that could possibly enter my mouth. This wasn't just because I didn't trust Voka enough. It was also because Voka was the poison god's divine kingdom. Perhaps many things would be harmless in his divine kingdom, but the mere existence of the concept of poison would be enough to destroy an entire country. This was not a lie to scare people, but a statement of experience learned from painful lessons in the past. Food brought from the kingdom of the dead was a deadly poison, and gold brought from the kingdom of heaven was excrement and poisonous snakes. All these fables and myths were based on the original. Many things in a divine kingdom were part of a divine concept. The concept of an order God's divine kingdom would be purer, which also meant that it would be more dangerous. I had just left the snake god's divine kingdom, so I didn't want to die in such an embarrassing manner like food poisoning. Little Red has had a stomachache for 2 days now. I'm no thick-skinned dragons. The poison that made her feel uncomfortable might actually be fatal to me. Are you certain that she didn't have indigestion because she thought that she ate one meal for an entire year? What Harlowe said made far too much sense. Cough, cough. Let's talk about the present. Where should we go to find some food? I hadn't been impulsive to throw away food and supplies. As a veteran adventurer, I was confident that I could find food anywhere. Even in a lava hell, I would be able to catch fire snakes or fire tortoises to eat. However, the prerequisite was that I had to find something that could move. On the way here, I only saw sand. I also tasted a flock of demon vultures circling above us, waiting to eat rotting meat. The rotting meat stench and parasites made it impossible for me to swallow them. However, no matter how disgusting a rotting meat was, it probably wouldn't taste so bad if it was still an egg. Finally, I drooled as I looked at the demon vultures above me. Perhaps I should catch one and interrogate it to see how many eggs it had, or how many people it had in its family. As a senior mage teacher, it's my duty to remind you, as an acolyte, that there's a special list in demonology. Vulture demons and demon vultures are 2 different types of creatures. Vulture demons can be seen in the mortal plane and are a special type of magical beast. Vulture demons are a type of demons' unique evolution. Although they're scavengers, they're still demons. All right then, I did my best to think with my brain instead of my stomach for several seconds. Finally, I understood what Harloise meant. So much nonsense. So it turns out that demon vultures don't lay eggs. I looked at Harloise in disappointment. As she was a half-undead and a magical pet, she was completely capable of absorbing mana to feed on herself. Double the mana consumption was another reason why I was so hungry. I became even more dazed as I watched Harloise proudly act like a scholar. Right? Don't they all say cat eggs and dog eggs? Harloise, you know how to lay eggs, right? I looked at Harloise with even more anticipation and love in my eyes. Perhaps it was because I had never treated her so gently before, but she suddenly became nervous. Did you forget about our soul connection? You want to eat slime elf soup? Don't even think about it. And then, the cat instantly grew wings and flew away. I'm so hungry. The next instant, my stomach once again took over control of my brain, and my trembling hand reached for the fried egg on my back. I meant dragon egg. It'll be fine to eat 2 bites, just 2 bites. No, it'll definitely be fine. Don't suddenly change into a novel type. I was so hungry that my mind was hazy. Was it my system that was commenting on me, or was it my little remaining conscience? Just as I was struggling internally, Harloise's delighted voice entered my mind. Roland, there's a lone food up ahead. You've led me astray. There's an adventurer who's met with misfortune. Chapter 583. When I met with danger in the desert, due to some accident, self-inflicted injury, I would never have expected that I would be the last to arrive in the temporary adventuring group that I had gathered. But when I considered my pitiful luck stat, this seemed to be only natural. In that case, it seemed like it was a wise decision for me to leave early and be the first to arrive. More than 20 days ago, Adam and Marguerite's journey to the North Pole finally came to an end. It wasn't that Adam finally admitted that he had no sense of direction, but rather that after overcoming a series of difficulties and obstacles, they achieved an epic achievement that no mortal could surpass. They successfully reached the impossible destination at the North Pole of the world, proving that the world of Aichi was round and square. This is the legendary end of the endless sea, the boundary of the world. They passed through the obstacles of mountains, wrestled with the Yeti at the North Pole. That was what Adam believed, but the Yeti actually wanted to cook them. Played around with the ice trolls. The trolls still wanted to cook them. Raced with the white dragons and snow dragons. The dragons failed in their attempt to change their taste. Passed through the ice wall of size that prevented the living from advancing. And finally arrived at the northernmost part of the world. However, what they saw was an unforgettable scene. It was a cliff, but it extended to an endless horizon. If one took a step forward, they would fall into the endless void. Even the seawater here had been frozen. Even Adam instinctively felt fear as he looked at the bottomless abyss at the edge of the cliff. Creator goddess Ike's understanding of the world was connected to the world. When the goddess of Ike believed that the world should be a cube, the world truly became a cube. Nobody knew what would happen if anyone took a single step forward. The magnificent glaciers created the most orderly ice plains and ice cliffs in the world. Below them was a bottomless abyss. Humans on the ice plains were no different from dust. The creator goddess was showing off her miraculous abilities. Even the insensitive Adam was stunned by this scene. Then, he took out a memory crystal and began recording the surrounding scenery. You can enjoy the scenery? Marguerite really thought that Adam had a stomachache. She couldn't believe that he would make a souvenir of the journey. Didn't he just walk wherever he went? He ate barbecued meat at the volcano and caught fish and prawns at the river. How could he still have the sensibility to appreciate the scenery? Oh, if that guy sees this, it will probably help his ice magic a little. This is the real Ice Aeon. Adam's casual explanation made Marguerite inexplicably unhappy. I didn't see that Adam was so meticulous to his woman. But then he smiled faintly. At a time like this, what else could he not accept? Men and women had their own way of getting along, and men also had their own way of getting along with each other. While Adam was running around with the camera, Marguerite began to build an ice house. It seemed that they were planning to spend the night here. After recording for a few seconds, Adam realized that it was a waste of effort. It was too cold here. The memory crystal only worked for a few seconds before it shattered. Since there was no path ahead, he hesitated whether he should take advantage of the fact that the sky wasn't dark yet and suggest a return as soon as possible. However, he felt that it was somewhat meaningless. He had worked so hard to get here, only to have to turn back. What is this? Then he raised his head and discovered that there was a huge monument of white ice at the border. The top of the huge ice monument extended all the way into the clouds, but he didn't see it all when he was far away. Only when he was close to the border of this world could he not ignore such an existence. It was very mysterious. This place is the end of the world, and there is no path ahead. However, in order to commend the brave ones who saw this monument for their fearlessness and sacrifice, and for the fearless ones to not take the boring path back, you can engrave your name and destination on the monument. You can engrave your name and destination on the monument, and I will use my supreme authority to send you there immediately. On the huge monument, other than the strange message, there were only 2 names left at a position about 1 meter high. The strange inscription on the monument and the lack of other people's messages made people suspect that this was a boring prank. However, the inscription on the monument was clearly written in an unknown language. Even an uncouth person like Adam could understand it. It was obviously a little strange. However, the inscription at the bottom of the inscription, which had a strange godly power, explained everything. Your mother, H.E. Just like how programmers like to leave behind a few Easter eggs when creating a virtual world, the creator of all life, the goddess of creation, H.E., who didn't leave behind any miracles, also left her handwriting at the border of this world. In this world's most difficult place to reach, there was a door that could lead to any corner of the world. One couldn't help but want to sigh. Perhaps the goddess H.E. wasn't as old-fashioned and solemn as the legends made her out to be. Perhaps she also once looked at her own work with pride and then left her signature and footprints in satisfaction, leaving behind a surprise gift for the bravest adventurers. Adam and Marguerite felt an indescribable warmth in their hearts. This was a warmth that developed in their hearts. Adam and Marguerite instinctively believed the words on the monument, no matter how ridiculous the content was. They also instinctively knew that this was a chance for each person to travel to another world only once in their lifetime. However, no matter if it was the highest level of heaven or the lowest level of the bottomless abyss, it was possible to instantly travel to both worlds. No power or person would be able to stop all of this from happening. They also instinctively knew that this was an unexpected surprise left behind by the goddess of creation for their children. That was why they couldn't tell anyone about the truth of this place after they left. They could invite them to explore this place as well, but they couldn't tell them just what kind of surprise awaited them here. Without reaching this final step, they would never be able to see the inscription on the monument no matter what. Adam fell silent, while Marguerite smiled. The 2 of them exchanged glances and tacitly inscribed each other's names on the monument. Only the destination was identical. Adam Hahn, a freedom fighter who pursues adventure. I hope to reach the 100th level of the abyss, the Ashen Furnace's Dragontail Bar. Marguerite, a mage who pursues truth and love. I hope to reach the 100th level of the abyss, the Ashen Furnace's Dragontail Bar. Time flashed, and the next instant, everyone in the Dragontail Bar's main hall stared in astonishment at the 2 people who suddenly appeared. The 2 of them exchanged glances. Adam laughed out loud, while Marguerite covered her mouth and smiled faintly. This was truly a pleasant surprise, a warm little gift that made everyone happy. The 2 of them looked at the bar in their memories. Demons and ghosts were still gathered there. The one-eyed succubus lady boss stared at them dumbfoundedly. Everything seemed to be the same as before, except for a familiar female voice that suddenly interrupted the 2's joyous time. Idiot Adam, Sister Marguerite, why are you only here now? I've been waiting for almost a month. A familiar person was already waiting for them at the familiar table. At this time, he was holding a glass of orange cocktail and looking at them proudly. Everyone else had already arrived at the gathering location. A certain summoner was still in the desert, enjoying the pleasant surprise of a disaster. But when he arrived at the gathering location, an even greater surprise was waiting for him. If one had to find out who was the first to arrive and had chosen the best path with great care, yet was still the last to arrive, apart from Roland's despair-inducing luck stat, the only explanation would be the world's evil will. Fresh meat. When the tiefling Cassandra Carolyn woke up from her unconsciousness, she saw blood-red eyes and strange shouts. A large mouth filled with saliva seemed to be opening right in front of her. Ferocious silver teeth were as blinding as an exorcist's blade. The saliva that represented hunger was about to drip onto her body. "Don't eat me. Tieflings aren't tasty at all. My meat stinks." At this moment, Cassandra truly wished that she could no longer understand the mortal plane's human language. She had finally managed to escape from her enemies, only to fall into the hands of a desert cannibal tribe. Cassandra was the daughter of the wealthy tycoon Ron, the owner of the desert oasis Haas. Due to the tiefling tribe's traditions, she had learned the mortal plane's language ever since she was young. She also received a scholar's education. Although she was only a tiefling, she was still the daughter of the Heart Oasis's ruler. Tiefling meant bastard in the Chaos Abyss. And this was indeed the case. Tieflings were all descendants of demons and devils. No matter what species their parents were, most of them would eventually listen to the Chaos Abyss's summons and come to the bottomless Chaos Abyss. In the Chaos Abyss, where the strong preyed on the weak, tieflings were considered to have excellent natural talent and individual power levels. However, it was quite difficult for them to show off. Most tieflings would die in battle, and most common outcome would be to join a tiefling tribe. Perhaps due to the demonkin bloodline, it was quite difficult for tieflings to have any virtuous individuals. Thieves, and bandits would forever be the backbone of a tiefling tribe. Meanwhile, the wealthy tycoon Ron was a legendary individual among tieflings. He advocated peaceful trade and developed trade routes. Unknowingly, he became a world-famous major individual. Cassandra Carolyn was his only daughter and heir. She was also the most beautiful flower in the Zinna Desert. She was known as the most beautiful Black Pearl. Currently, Black Pearl, Carolyn had an expression of fear. Apart from the cannibals who were jumping up and down in excitement, the black-masked and black-caped assassins had finally surrounded her. The assassins unsheathed their swords and scimitars. They couldn't leave a single person alive in this assassination attempt. Since they encountered Carolyn, it was only a matter of a corpse bag. Suddenly, the cannibal who was currently going through Carolyn's corpse bag started laughing. His laughter was filled with delight and insanity. He happily looked at the assassins around him and couldn't stop drooling, as if he was looking at a feast. More meat. Fresh meat. Chapter 584. People in our line of work should have realized this long ago. It's impossible to avoid getting your feet wet if you always walk by the river. The old tiefling assassin spoke to the young assassin with a sigh and calm expression. It was as if he had already seen through life and death. Meanwhile, in the background, there were two tiefling assassins tied to pillars. "It doesn't matter to you, old man. I'm still young, and I'm not married yet." The young assassin was unwilling to accept being instantly defeated on his first mission. Not only had he been defeated without even seeing his opponent's attack, since there was a difference in power levels, he had also been eaten by an ogre. His soul probably wouldn't even be able to rest in peace, and he probably wouldn't be able to return to the embrace of the great demon Godspack. Meanwhile, I was currently gulping down the jerky that I had worked so hard to obtain as I spoke in a muffled voice. "Black girl, what are they talking about?" Just like how the residents of the Chaos Abyss would always think that tieflings had strange accents. The Chaos Abyss language with a mortal plane accent seemed to be synonymous with country bumpkins. Only tieflings would find this accent to be familiar. But now, Caroline only felt suffocated when she heard this Chaos Abyss language with a mortal plane accent. This young warrior was quite powerful. The elite assassins that killed her guards were nothing in front of him. They were all instantly defeated. However, there was definitely something wrong with this person's interests. Caroline was clearly quite famous, but he didn't even look at her. He even started taking off the pants of the male assassins. Cough, cough, don't misunderstand. Roland was searching for food. The snacks that Caroline had on her wouldn't even be enough to fill his teeth. He then explained that he was a traveler who had met with misfortune. Of course, Caroline was so frightened that she wouldn't believe him, nor would she properly translate the tiefling dialect for him. She directly told the assassins about the word ogre, causing them to be on edge as they waited for the moment that they would be able to eat at Caroline's table. I had a headache now. I could speak the Chaos Abyss language, but the tiefling dialect had a lot of retroflex sounds. Only demon descendants with curved tongues would be able to speak it well. It had nothing to do with magic, so I didn't know how to speak it at all. However, I learned from their conversation that there were many species living together in the 102nd level of the Chaos Abyss. Tieflings were the largest species here. Since this level was far too vast, there was no unified Chaos Abyss Lord here. There were more than 10 Chaos Lords here that maintained a subtle balance. Meanwhile, this little girl who had accidentally peed herself and was pretending that nothing had happened seemed to be the daughter of a Tiefling Chaos Lord. Not only that, her territory seemed to be quite close to where I was. In that case, it was quite clear what I needed to do. I followed the little girl to her territory, got some supplies and a map, and then looked for a guide. It would be best if there was a teleportation gate that led directly to the 100th floor, but if there wasn't, climbing one more floor wouldn't be too scary. No, as a member of the Caroline family, how can you bring an unknown person to our oasis? I was a little speechless. Girl, I just saved you. How could you turn your back on me so quickly? Girl, do you still hold a grudge for scaring you just now? Fine, give me a direction, and I'll find it myself. However, the dark-skinned, red-haired female tiefling fell silent. After a while, she said something to the assassin hanging on the rack. The assassin quickly replied with a few words, as if they were arguing about something. As they talked, the tiefling kept glancing in my direction. Even though I didn't understand the tiefling dialect, I was able to guess what the tiefling was trying to say. Girl, don't tell me that you don't even know where your home is. All right then. Her dark-skinned face completely flushed red. Even her little tail seemed to have no energy left in it at all. It would seem that this little girl's skin was truly quite thin. I felt rather helpless. My growling stomach reminded me that the amount of dry food that a kind-hearted person gifted to me was still far from enough. I needed to hurry and continue on my way. 20 minutes later, such a scene appeared in the desert. I urged Milady to go on her way, while Milady led a group of black-caped assassins to lead the way. Just now, Milady and the assassins had reached an agreement. When we arrived at her destination, she would release all the young assassins apart from the leader. Milady and the assassins swore in the name of the great demon god Spak that they would abide by the rules of the experiment. Tieflings wouldn't dare to violate such an agreement. Since this was the mortal plane where so many tiefling tribes resided, I also revealed some of my demonized traits in order to avoid trouble. For example, I revealed the original sin demon gods' demon wings, dragon scales, dragon claws, and other demonized traits that would be easily mistaken for others. And so, in their eyes, I was probably an unfortunate individual who was summoned by the Chaos Abyss. No matter if it was the assassins or Milady, they all had rather sympathetic expressions as they looked at me. There were countless tiefling compatriots who were trapped by the Chaos Abyss's bloodline every year. They believed that they were returning to their home and family. But what they actually received was a completely different hell. Actually, you could have completely hidden your demonized traits. There's no need for you to come to the Chaos Abyss. Caroline stopped halfway through her sentence, but she had an expression of pity. Little girl, what do you know? You're a native tiefling descendant of the Chaos Abyss. How could you possibly know about the unstoppable power of the Chaos Abyss's bloodline? A powerful tiefling who was capable of casually hiding his demonized traits would obviously be able to control his own bloodline. Such an existence would have a very high status in the tiefling tribe. And so, I casually agreed to Spak's demon god's oath, promising that I wouldn't do anything harmful to the oasis or the tiefling tribe. However, I actually didn't think much of it. The great demon god Spak's oath is unbreakable. Even if Spak appears in front of me right now, I'll still be able to say whatever I want. Although the great demon god Spak's title sounded quite frightening, the evil god Spak wasn't really an amazing individual at all. It was indeed quite amazing for a half-blood tiefling to ascend to the divine throne and obtain the divine concept of tiefling's protector. But in the entire universe, Spak would only be the ruler of the 245th level of the Chaos Abyss, a weak god with very few believers. His personal combat strength wouldn't be high, and he didn't have any special abilities or powerful allies. In fact, he wouldn't even be able to completely control his own level of the Chaos Abyss. The incarnations he sent out would always be killed by others, causing his power level to decrease. It could be said that he was an extremely failed weak god. But to tieflings, Spak was the greatest existence of all. Their faith in him was even higher than that of the main gods. This was because of the tieflings' special status. They were usually viewed as bastards by high-level existences of the Chaos faction. Some tieflings were descendants of demons, devils, and even evil gods. More than 90% of tieflings lived in the mortal plane. That's right, more than 90%. It could be said that the great majority of tieflings had once been residents of the mortal plane. They had dark skin, brown skin, special magical characteristics, and a stench of sulfur on their breath. Every tiefling's magical characteristics were different. The most common and obvious characteristics would be various horns and curved tails. Such magical characteristics couldn't be too obvious. Just looking at their physical characteristics, tieflings were similar to succubi. However, tieflings were much weaker and easier to fool. That was why many devils and demon lords kept tieflings as playthings. There were many reasons why tieflings would appear. Some evil god or devil lord would descend in the mortal plane, steal a physical body, transform into a demon, and leave behind a descendant. Some devils or demon armies would do evil by conquering a certain city. Some evil cultists would organize mass demonization rituals, some evil god schemes, some witches' children, and so on. However, tieflings were completely different from true devil's children or demon descendants. Original devils and demons were pure evil. They were killing machines that their elders had spent a great deal of effort to create. Evil gods' children were precious resources. If a tiefling was thrown into the mortal plane, it would definitely be used for some grand scheme. For example, in the legends, a certain evil god's child named Inside Story slaughtered all gods and demons until he finally ascended to the throne of the god of slaughter. Meanwhile, tieflings were only mortals that had been tainted with demonic energy. Their mothers had been corroded by demonic energy in their mother's womb, which caused them to have some devil characteristics. They were completely different from natural residents of the lower planes. However, other mortals wouldn't be able to tell this apart. Devil's children, unlucky ones, bringers of misfortune, and so on. Just thinking about it, there are countless filthy adjectives that could be used to describe tieflings. Most tieflings' mothers, most were single mothers, would even be labeled as witches or the type of person who had sex with devils. The gods' churches would never speak up for such people. Barbecuing witches wasn't something that only Earth could do. The birth of a tiefling descendant was a calamity to begin with. It would be quite difficult for tieflings' family members to have a good ending. It could be said that in the mortal plane, where everything was either black or white, most tieflings who were born with demon characteristics would have a nightmarish childhood. This wasn't only for the tieflings themselves, but also for their family members. And for the tieflings, this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Most tieflings would be unable to hide their demonized characteristics. They could think of ways to hide their horns and tails, but their skin color would be fatal. If a tiefling wanted to survive among humans, they would have to wear a mask and cloak for the rest of their lives. Not only would it be impossible for them to find a proper job or establish social relations, even if they dropped their cloak while passing through a city, it was highly likely that they would be burned to death by a mob. Even if there were some lucky tieflings who sacrificed a lot and used their outstanding natural talents to help many people, such as driving away a magical beast horde that was attacking a city, becoming the hero of the city, and settling down there. Their demon bloodline would still bring misfortune. It was highly likely that a long drought, an unstoppable natural disaster, or a sudden arrival of a divine Jaw class member would cause the tiefling to become the bringer of misfortune and a schemer. The tiefling would then have to leave the mortal plane. If a tiefling walked through the mortal plane, no matter what they did, they would always be on guard and on guard. Yet this type of prejudice couldn't be said to be completely wrong. Part of the tiefling's bloodline from the lower planes would make them impatient, easily angered, greedy, and lustful. Meanwhile, the tiefling's minor magic, such as invisibility, teleportation, and night vision abilities, were quite convenient when doing evil deeds. Their ugly and evil appearances made it quite difficult for tieflings to find a proper job. Due to the prejudice of outsiders and the tiefling's powerful natural talents compared to humans, it was quite normal for tieflings to go down the wrong path. Robbers, thieves, and assassins would forever be the most popular jobs for tieflings. Even in the chaotic underground world, there were quite a few tieflings. Tieflings' long lifespans meant that no matter what the process was like, they would definitely experience the warmth and coldness of the human world. Their loved ones would die, and they would have no one to miss. Some scholars even suggested that the great majority of tieflings would answer the summons of the Chaos Abyss and enter the Chaos Abyss. This wasn't simply because they were unable to resist the summons of their bloodline. It was because they had already despaired of human society in the mortal plane. And even if tieflings entered the Chaos Abyss wasn't a good place to begin with. Pure demons viewed tieflings as nothing more than weaklings and playthings. Tieflings were nothing more than entering a deeper level of hell. In contrast, the descendants of the gods of chaos had the noble title of Asmo, which implied nobility. Asmo had different colored eyes, special golden skin, metallic hair, and a faint glow around them. However, it was quite easy for tieflings to find a job in a certain church or church. It would only be a matter of time before they became higher-ups in a church, and when they went out adventuring, they would mysteriously gain the trust and admiration of ordinary people. It would be far too easy for them to become celebrities and idols. Strictly speaking, angel bloodlines were also a type of Asmo. The treatment I received in the Bardi Empire back then was the best evidence. Of course, such treatment naturally made many tieflings feel uneasy, but I have to say, if the remnants of the previous dynasty want to compare their treatment to the second or third generation of the current dynasty, they should first ask their father in power if he agrees. Cough. I seem to have accidentally said too much. Getting back to the main topic. The reason why countless tieflings devoutly believed in him was because the great demon god Spak had made a grand vow to save tieflings like himself. Spak had performed many miracles in the mortal plane, sending out incarnations and god envoys to save his own tieflings. However, the Order gods had chased him around like dogs. Perhaps this was rather unreliable, but for tieflings who had been oppressed by other species, the existence of a guardian god was already excellent news. The tieflings greatly respected and believed in the great demon god Spak, far more than any other species. Naturally, Spak's status among the tieflings was also greatly improved. There was a reason why I knew so much about tieflings. Strictly speaking, back when Eliza had been demonized in the River Styx, she had also been a tiefling. For a long time, she had been a pure tiefling. And since the underground world was a land of exiles from the surface world, the tieflings numbered about as many as all the other countries combined. However, Eliza had received far too much favor from the Chaos Abyss. In the end, she had been demonized too much and became a half-demon. With a single thought, she could demonize even more deeply and become a true demon at any time. She was basically the daughter of the Chaos Abyss. Don't think that transforming into a demon would be easy. For tieflings who had given up on being human, there would be a price to pay in order to transform into a demon. Since the tieflings had enough power, they would need to at least obtain the pure bloodline of a powerful demon or devil. This meant that they would need to make the residents of the lower planes bleed greatly. This was no easy task. Now that I thought about it, since the Chaos Abyss had its own will, that meant that the Chaos Abyss favor was equivalent to Cynthia's favor. Since Cynthia had always been looking after Eliza, that meant that she had also been watching over us. It would seem that there were still many hidden secrets from the past. Perhaps Eliza had been Cynthia's hidden nail and ticking time bomb. She would be able to trap us at a critical moment. Shouldn't I thank Cavendish for tricking Cynthia? Otherwise, this would have been truly troublesome. Desert areas were quite hot during the day and quite cold at night. However, this wasn't a desert in a mortal plane. There were 3 suns in the sky, and it was said that a single night would last less than 2 hours. Just this alone made people feel like they had entered a living hell. Not long ago, I had been in a damp and dark swamp. Now I was in a sunny desert. The tremendous difference in temperature was indeed quite uncomfortable. TSK, this should be fine. There are many places in the Chaos Abyss that are far worse than this. As far as I could remember, this wasn't much at all. Some Chaos Abyss plains were filled with deadly poisonous gas. Some Chaos Abyss plains were filled with flames and oceans. Some Chaos Abyss plains didn't even have air. There were only sandstorms everywhere. These Chaos Abyss plains' living environments were already quite good. At the very least, they were much better than the Earth Elemental Plane. When I thought about the Earth Elemental Plane, I suddenly recalled a certain existence whose name I couldn't say. Suddenly, an ominous premonition appeared in my heart. No way, I didn't call that guy over. At this moment, after passing several hills, the brightest pearl in the 102nd level of the Chaos Abyss, the Heart Oasis, appeared before us. Chapter 585. Heart, the capital of Yellow Sand, was the only oasis in the surrounding several thousand kilometers. Heart was the only oasis for all 3 major trade routes that crossed the desert. It was truly a golden route. It was impossible to tell how much it would cost to pass through Heart every year. Previous rulers of the Yellow Sand capital had done this as well. But after the magnate Ron took over the city, he reduced the taxes to 0. While the income from the taxes was greatly reduced, more than 10 times the number of merchant caravans came to Heart. Soon, this foolish policy became known as the reason why the Yellow Sand capital was able to flourish. Perhaps some people would say that this was just a simple strategy. However, there were many times when a good policy would end up being bad. What failed wasn't creativity, but execution. In order to truly benefit from this policy, I would also need to get rid of all the other factors that prevented merchant caravans from coming to Heart. I would need to eliminate bandits, attack competitors, regularly eliminate magical beasts, and establish resting spots in the desert. None of these would be easy tasks. On my way here, I had already heard Cassandra boast about her father's great achievements. However, this city didn't seem as friendly as she described it to be. As I strolled around the Yellow Sand capital, I felt that everyone was staring at me rather harshly. Even the black staff-wielding guards were glaring at me in an unfriendly manner. I didn't do anything, did I? I finally realized what was wrong when I saw that everyone was looking at me warily. Isn't this city being too xenophobic? That's not it. It's just that the last 2 times Heart was almost conquered were thanks to information provided by foreign spies. Now, an unfamiliar outsider has appeared on the streets, and he's obviously a warrior. Even though Cassandra Carolyn had entered her own city, she still wrapped herself in a thick cloak as if she was hiding from something. Then why wasn't I interrogated when I entered? That's because the other few times when Heart was attacked from both inside and outside, the scouts were all local tieflings. Those tieflings finally discovered that tieflings don't have much loyalty as long as they pay a good price. Tieflings are much cheaper than scouts from other tribes. All right then, I could pretty much guess why Cassandra Carolyn was still hiding even after entering her own city. Was she worried that the spies still hadn't given up on her? In other words, she didn't believe that the ordinary city guards could protect her. However, being stared at like this wasn't a good thing either. After I turned a corner, 2 dragon horns appeared on my head and a pair of dragon wings appeared on my back. I also let off some of the aura of the Chaos Abyss. Instantly, the guards' defensive gazes disappeared. However, why did the appearance of this creature, which had a pair of blindfolded eyes, a pair of wings on its back, and two horns on its head, seemed so familiar. I really wanted to make an old joke about how you're all seeking your own death, but I felt like I was getting bored of it. Besides, it seemed like nobody here understood what I was seeing. Adventurer, can you send me home? My family should be looking for me. They will reward me handsomely. Blinking her eyes, Cassandra tried to recall her etiquette teacher's lesson on diplomacy. She wanted to use her most sincere words to invite Mr. Blind Ogre to visit her home, but in fact, she was cursing in her heart. You actually scared me to the point of peeing. You actually dared to scare a lady? See how my father will deal with you. She wouldn't go so far as to repay kindness with evil, but if she didn't find a chance to take revenge, Caroline, who had always had a smooth-sailing life, would feel wronged. No, it's too troublesome. Where's the most famous tavern, bar, and restaurant in this area? Even without seeing the red-haired girl's flashing eyes, I knew what she was planning to do. Based on her personality, it could range from a harmless yet disgusting naughty child's prank to a vile attempt to kill someone to keep them quiet. I refused, not because I was afraid of this girl, but rather because it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Yep, it definitely wasn't because I was so hungry that I didn't want to move. How could these ordinary restaurants possibly compare to my family's? My family chef is a super chef hired from the most famous restaurant in Shaler Rain City. All of my food is purchased from thousands of kilometers away. Yep, I'll go. In front of my stomach, I would rather not care about my face or anything like that. Suddenly, an evil wind attacked me. I couldn't help but shiver as if some vicious beast was staring at me. I suddenly raised my head to see a figure in the sky that I had just met 2 days ago. Lasnina? Compared to a week ago, Lasnina seemed rather disheveled. The thick dark bags under her eyes indicated that she had been suffering from insomnia for a long time. Her long hair was messy and uncombed, and her originally beautiful appearance had been reduced yet again. The bandages and bloodstains on her body indicated that she was still unable to break free from the effects of the stare of the Hell God. Perhaps this was also why she was unable to sleep peacefully. Damn it, did I waste too much time in the desert? I didn't believe that I had been followed. No matter how profound a prophecy spell was, it would be impossible for her to find any traces of me in the river of fate. Tracking my footprints in the desert would be even more of a joke. In that case, I must have stayed in this level for far too long. She was unwilling to give up after following me here, and was searching for me in every city. Lasnina's carelessness in floating above the oasis naturally attracted the attention of others. The Air Knight and the mage riding on the giant bat had already approached her, but they still hadn't come into contact with Lasnina yet. The Devil Lord Carwins casually waved her hand, causing a chain of lightning to strike down and ignite all the Air Knight. Even the black-robed mage, who was wearing a magical shield, was unable to resist at all, as he was instantly reduced to ashes. This evil invader used such an obvious method of attack to express her undisguised evil intentions. The city's alarm bells instantly rang, and the entire city entered a state of war. Even more powerful mages and city guards all walked out of their own fortresses and mage towers. Numerous offensive magic spells took form on top of the mage towers. As the most important business city in the area, how could Hart not be heavily guarded? However, Lasnina seemed to completely ignore the threat before her. She simply silently chanted her own incantation. Black magic began to spread, and the clouds in the sky were dyed black. Then, they began to transform into dark green clouds. Judging from the amount of magic gathered, this spell would soon surpass the definition of a forbidden spell in the world. Don't let her use that spell. It wasn't that there weren't any mages who knew what was good for them. If this dark green curse spell landed, it was likely the Heart, the capital of the desert, would be nothing but sand in the future. That's how she chased us all the way here? Just how many cities did she destroy on her way here? I didn't believe that Lasnina knew that I just happened to be in this city. Otherwise, it would be quite foolish of her to immediately cast a powerful spell. This type of forbidden spell was incredibly powerful and had a large area of effect. It would be far less threatening to powerful individuals than a 9-circle single-target spell. In that case, Las Nina simply wanted to destroy this entire city. I don't know where you are, but as long as I keep destroying cities one by one, you'll appear before me sooner or later. Perhaps Las Nina wanted to vent her anger, or perhaps she wanted to cut off Las Nina's ability to attack her, or perhaps she was considering how naive Las Nina's identity as a holy knight was. Over the past week, while Roland had been in a state of confusion, the insane Devil Lord had become the scariest natural calamity in the mortal plane. Previously, due to the snake god's existence, the Chaos Abyss's kingdom had still been faintly orderly. That situation had obscured the true appearance of the Chaos Abyss. From a certain standpoint, everything that happened in this ownerless Chaos Abyss was the true Chaos Abyss, a jungle paradise where the strong preyed on the weak. In the countless levels of the Chaos Abyss, people and cities would be destroyed every moment for various reasons. Oftentimes, the lives and deaths of the weak would be nothing more than a form of entertainment for the strong. Curse her, my lord, please have mercy and spare us. Why? Why is this happening? Why are you attacking us? Las Nina smiled in delight as she listened to the ants' screams and angry roars. If it wasn't for the fact that she was in a hurry to find Las Nina, she would have even cursed the ants so that they wouldn't die for so long. Perhaps spending an entire year listening to their screams and curses would be a good vacation for her. A reason? Did she even need a reason to casually stomp a bunch of ants to death? Did she even remember how many annoying mosquitoes she had slapped to death? Perhaps some people would despise the existence of order. But when even the most basic order no longer existed, when there were no restrictions on those who possessed martial power, and when the strong didn't believe that the weak were the same kind of existence, it was only natural that anything could happen. A large-scale massacre? Was it possible to find a witness for something that didn't happen? Everyone had died? That meant that the dead couldn't testify? Destroying peaceful and neutral medical facilities and diplomatic embassies? I accidentally used the wrong information from a map from 10 years ago. Let me verbally express my regret. Creating famine and refugees? Oh, that was truly an unfortunate accident. Still, it was their fault for having such an evil master. Apology and compensation? How would that be possible? I already said that it was an unfortunate accident. Since it was an accident, there was no need to think too much about it. Yep, let me verbally express my regret. War crimes? Haha, youngster, no matter which world you were in, war would always occur. You just might not know about it. When the strong lost all restraints on their power, when simple use of martial power would be able to obtain tremendous benefits, even the most terrifying of evil deeds would become a daily occurrence. Furthermore, when evil deeds became a daily occurrence, killing and destruction would no longer be related to personal benefits or the country's name. Killing and destruction would become nothing more than simple entertainment. Those war machines that were already addicted to killing and destruction might not only destroy themselves in the end. This was the 37th city that Las Nina had intended to destroy in the past 5 days. From the bottom of her heart, she had already given up on searching for Roland, as it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. It was highly likely that Roland had already left this dimension. However, the endless destruction and screams made her feel as if she was being poisoned with pleasure. Watching these ants beg for mercy before being stomped to death made her feel comfortable all over. It was as if the injuries on her body had become much more comfortable. For Las Nina, who had fallen into darkness for countless years, the judgment from her soul didn't awaken her conscience that she had long since abandoned. Instead, it made her eager to pass on her pain to even more weaklings. Cry, scream, and then all of you can die. Her hysterical laughter echoed in the skies above the city. The next instant, a transparent ice sword suddenly pierced through her heart. Las Nina turned around with an expression of disbelief. However, the ice sword that had pierced through her heart was burning fiercely. The assassin that suddenly appeared out of the clouds had a pair of gorgeous wings. The fiery wings of the war angel were emitting astonishing heat and holy light. The assassin furiously roared and directly pushed away the dark green curse cloud. The killing intent within the sword was like a calamity that could destroy the world. Las Nina, Receive your judgment. Chapter 586. Las Nina, you must die. My temporary bandages of cloth had already been torn to shreds. Although I couldn't open my bloody eyes, it was impossible for my thin eyelids to block my soul-piercing divine eyes. In my world, countless dead souls were currently surrounding Las Nina. These souls were currently using their empty eye sockets and helpless screams to accuse me of Las Nina's crimes. Just how many people have died at her hands? A mysterious anger burned in my heart. Even though I was also an executioner whose hands were stained with blood, I still couldn't accept such a slaughter. Every life should be valuable. Those who took lives would have to bear the weight of the dead. No matter how noble or how valuable one's reason for killing was, it was impossible to hide the fact that killing was one of the vilest actions of all. If you chose to use slaughter to solve your problem, then you would have to bear an equal amount of sin. One day, evil villains whose hands were stained with blood would be judged, no matter which dimension they were in, and no matter what reason they had for killing. Killing for the sake of national benefits and glory? How laughable! How could there be any justice in killing? Killing for the sake of satisfying one's own desires? That was the lowest and most despicable of third-rate villains. I felt even more disgusted than filthy maggots. Las Nina, die like a lowly insect. I furiously swung my eye sword with a high-purity holy light that would harm both enemies and myself. Harlow's pitiful screams echoed in my ears, but at this time, I could only tell her to bear with it for a while longer. Las Nina's ice sword viciously sliced at Las Nina's beautiful face and body. Every sword strike burned Las Nina's devil lord limbs like the sun. However, Las Nina's distorted face was laughing hysterically amidst the flames. Finally, I finally found you. No matter how many insects I kill, I'm never satisfied. Las Nina's limbs were instantly reduced to ash by the holy fire. However, her maniacal laughter didn't stop. As expected, my pain is only you, your soul, your blood. Only then can I be satisfied. Not far away in the sky, the ash reassembled itself. The perfect Las Nina instantly recovered. Her eyes were filled with lust as she stared at me. No, she wasn't in perfect condition. Judging from her weakened aura, she was clearly injured. The high-density, holy flames that can instantly kill a demon noble can only do this. However, my following counterattack didn't give me the time to sigh at how powerful my opponent was. In just the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with twisted magical runes. An immeasurable amount of mana was flowing through these runes. Mana that had transformed into plasma kept leaking outwards. The sky of the Chaos Abyss was being torn apart, and magical creatures from other dimensions were itching to attack. I could sense that countless magical eyes were staring at me. In the next moment, those malicious monsters turned into black liquid and flowed out of the void. As soon as they appeared in this world, they turned into distorted monsters. It was a pitch-black monster with countless holes all over its body. Its constantly twisting body was covered in all kinds of magic runes. I could sense that this was a pure amalgamation of curses. It was a magical creature that had been compressed together to form curses and witchcraft. Las Nina was the one who screamed in pain. Her famous magic sword had pierced through her only eye. The next instant, Las Nina, who had just gouged out her own eye, crushed it with her hand. She had an even more twisted smile as she looked at me, as if she was saying, "I can't see anymore. That special ability of yours that requires sight is no longer effective against me." Of course, I didn't believe that Las Nina would become completely blind. It was likely that those cursed magical creatures were her third or fourth eye. However, her unhesitatingly self-mutilating meant that she had gone completely insane. Or perhaps I should say that the Devil Lords had been insane from the very start. I took a deep breath and re-wrapped the cloth around my eye. Such an opponent wouldn't be easily defeated by hot-bloodedness. There was an absolute difference in power level between us. Charging forward with hot-bloodedness would be no different from suicide. I had dealt with many undying and undying creatures. However, Lasnina's undying nature was foundationally different from that of Omdrokin and the others. For the Devil Lords, their curses, jealousy, lust, betrayal, and violence represented the purest negative emotions of intelligent creatures. They didn't have any divine concepts or divine concepts. However, just as intelligent creatures would definitely have negative emotions, as long as intelligent creatures existed, they would naturally have an endless source of power. Since ancient times, the number of Devil Lords that had died due to external factors could be counted on one hand. The Devil Lords who were replaced would either be replaced by the next generation, or a new sin would replace the old sin. The most ancient Devil Lords had all lived from the very beginning of creation to the modern era. They were the symbol of undying and undying. Meanwhile, the new generation of Devil Lords, even the youngest of the Devil Lords, Lasnina, would be completely different from ordinary powerful devils. When I created my 7 original sins, I had researched their natures. They weren't as undying and undying as they claimed to be. Only the Creator Goddess was truly undying. Strictly speaking, although the Devil Lords represented the original sins that were undying, the Devil Lords weren't undying. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Devil Lords to be replaced. The Lord of Curses? Strictly speaking, it should be the Lord of Jealousy. You're the foundation of your existence because of your malice towards other individuals that are stronger than you. Hatred, jealousy, and hatred are all your food. I close my eyes as I prepare my trump card. Since I knew that my opponent was likely to be a Devil Lord, of course I would make preparations beforehand. In theory, there were only 2 methods to completely kill a Devil Lord like Lasnina. The first method was to use the normal method of attacking, killing her over and over again. This would cause her to use up all of her power in the process of reviving. Naturally, she would be forced to return to the Devil Lord's original position. During that period of time, the empty position of the Lord of Curses would cause all devils to go insane. If she couldn't quickly awaken, her position might be replaced by another devil. The second method was to use a special attack method to directly attack Lasnina's soul and origin, either destroying or sealing her. This method was even more direct than the first method. The first method would require a power level that surpassed Lasnina's. A main god would probably be enough. The second method would require a power level and special abilities that surpassed Lasnina's. Both methods would be incredibly difficult. Otherwise, I wouldn't have immediately used my trump card, Stare of the Hell God. The Stare of the Hell God was a direct attack on the soul. This was a dimensional attack that involved karma and fate. If Lasnina hadn't been able to withstand the Stare of the Hell God, I would have been able to directly replace her with another Lord of Curses. Currently, it would be impossible for me to forcefully kill Lasnina. All I did was ask her to go home and sleep, which was really displeasing. Since I intended to completely kill her, I only had one choice. Even if I had to pay an uncomfortable price, conservation, I need your power. Unlike the mortal plane's incarnation wars and proxy wars, the Chaos Abyss was a place where high-level existences could use their full power. Whenever the Chaos Abyss main gods started fighting, there would naturally be gods that perished, as well as innocent victims. While Roland and Lasnina were engaged in a bitter battle, a Devil Lord and Sailor, who is currently in the 101st and 100th levels of the Chaos Abyss, received news of Roland's arrival. Due to certain unexpected events, Roland's value in the Devil's eyes had increased yet again. 3 of the 5 Devil Lords were sent out at the same time. Even if they lost track of Roland, there were still 2 Devil Lords and 1 Sailor who were still trying to kill him. If high-level existences were about the same power level, their undying abilities, divine kingdoms, armies, and regenerative abilities would all become reinforcements. It would be quite easy for a battle of attrition that could last for 1 or 2 months. The Battle of the Hades had been fought for several years now, with very few exceptions. For example, Emperor Yongya would be impossible to kill without killing his army. This meant that as long as the devils moved quickly, it was theoretically quite possible for them to catch up to Roland. But suddenly, near the entrance to the 101st level, The Lord of Pride appeared in front of him with the exact same face as his target, Roland. The Lord of Pride, Aster, was delighted at first, but then paused for a moment before revealing an expression of shock and despair. Cavendish, why are you here? Compared to 7 years ago, the Chaos Abyss Prince didn't seem to have changed at all. He simply yawned. I'd like to ask you something. This is the demon's territory. You can't even defend your own territory, so why are you here? Could it be that you're plotting something? Chapter 587. Conservation was a powerful undead emperor. She was a genius who had reached the level of main god by herself. She was a rare, unlucky individual. During her battle against Roland, she received inspiration. She used her research results in the field of energy to successfully reach a level that no one had ever reached before. And just as she was about to proudly start her own business, she met Roland again. In that battle, Conservation hadn't even been able to recover to her peak condition, as she hadn't even had the chance to use her ace card. She was severely injured by Roland's shameless tactics. After that, she absorbed the aura of the Hades to recover, which resulted in her being restricted by the laws of the Hades and becoming a part of the Hades. This wasn't Roland's plan at all, nor did he expect that Conservation would instinctively absorb the aura of the Hades after being injured. Natural traps that were born by accident were also the hardest to guard against. Since some things had already happened, one could only admit that they were unlucky. The advantage of intelligent people was that they would rarely waste time on insignificant problems. They would know how to beat around the bush. And as a mage, stupidity was the most unacceptable talent. You wouldn't be able to become a mage if you had low intelligence. Since Conservation was an undead emperor, her intelligence couldn't possibly be lower than 30. She soon accepted the fact that she would never be able to leave this world again. Yep, soon enough, she used several hundred forbidden spells to cleanse this world, confirming that this world was indestructible. She then theoretically confirmed that even if this world was destroyed, she would die with it. She finally calmed down. Roland, you still have the guts to come see me. Of course. Just think about it. It's quite easy to kill me. But if I'm dead, would there still be any reason for this world to exist? As this bug-like world existed, this world would only exist as long as Roland was alive. And as long as this world ceased to exist, then Conservation, who was bound to this world, would meet a theoretically impossible end. All right, judging from the results, Roland had indeed done a wonderful job. But from an ethical standpoint, this seemed like a crime no matter how one looked at it. After Conservation calmed down, Roland began a difficult yet effective negotiation with Conservation. The process went something like, kill me if you have the guts. Kill me. Kill me. Ha! You don't dare to kill me, right? You don't dare to kill me, right? Tisk. I'm dead. You're dead. You're dead. I'm still alive and well. Why is this world so beautiful? The weather today is really good. Ahem. That's enough fun. Let's get down to business. Let's start with the rent. Water, electricity, and rent. Are you planning to pay with your body? Or do you want to pay in cash? How does it feel to camp in the wild? I have a mobile villa here, but it's a little expensive. Of course, if you have any daily necessities or luxury goods, I can buy them for you. Perhaps it looked like someone was maliciously trying to increase the number of words, but if he didn't repeat these words, it would be difficult to restore Roland's despicable appearance at that time. Of course, Roland was angry at being viciously beaten up by Conservation. Since he had a chance to negotiate with Conservation that he wouldn't lose no matter what, Roland was naturally as despicable as possible. Of course, Conservation could choose not to accept, but the sly Roland would unhesitatingly disappear for an entire day as long as the negotiation didn't go well, and then reappear the next day as if nothing had happened. This was a clear indication of something. I don't care. At most, I'll just give up on this small world. What about you? Are you intending to stay away from the world forever? Live the rest of your life alone in this small world? Alone in a pitch-black dimension, facing countless years, and worrying every day that I'll suddenly die and bring your world to an end. TSK, TSK, TSK. That's probably even worse than being exiled to another dimension. When the bargaining chips of both sides were completely unequal, in a way, it would become a one-sided extortion. Even if Roland hadn't been so reckless, conservation would have accepted this result sooner or later. After all, there was nothing she could do about it now. But Roland's actions not only increased the enmity between conservation and Roland, it also helped conservation to calm down even faster and reach an agreement faster. Actually, just the fact that Asso had been forced to his death by Roland had already caused conservation and Roland to become mortal enemies. Every time they met, they would fight to the death. Even if they stopped fighting now, it would still be impossible for them to establish a friendly relationship. Roland agreed to all of conservation's conditions. He would bring the floating fortress Yongye City into this world for conservation to live in. He would also bring more of conservation's subordinates into this world as servants. He would also purchase some female daily necessities. Since the unfortunate undead emperor was unable to leave the mortal plane, she could only make these conditions. But Roland's conditions were quite excessive. I'll provide you with the research topic and materials. You'll do it yourself, but you'll share all the research results with me. You'll create this world and become its manager. Yep, you'll manage it for me, and you'll help out when necessary. Relax, I don't need a main god like you to help out with any ordinary opponent. And so, Roland now had a personal magical consultant who hated him but absolutely needed to pray for his safety. The arenas and arenas that trapped the undead emperor were all constructed by conservation servants. The current bug-like world seemed like it was about to become an undead country. Of course, conservation could choose not to cooperate. In that case, Roland would only need to cancel his regular visits, which would allow conservation to enjoy being isolated from the rest of the world. And since he was able to leave this demi-plane as he pleased, Roland wasn't worried that conservation would do anything to him. She's just like me from back in the day, but even more pitiful than I was. Harlois' evaluation of conservation made Harlois mysteriously sad, especially the part about, if I die, you die, and if you die, I'll still be alive and happy. And now, it seemed that it was time for conservation to fulfill her contract. It was also time for her to help out. I opened up my mystical world. A gigantic arena surrounded me and Lasnina. This time, not only were there undead spectators, there was also a main god-level undead emperor in the sky of darkness. Conservation, I need your power. I refuse. What? Hey, that's not how the script was written. How could you ruin my plan at such a critical moment? I raised my head and saw that the ethereal figure floating in midair had already materialized. Her beautiful face was covered by a black veil, and her face was completely pale. However, her eyes were filled with undisguised hatred. With just a single glance, I understood. Harlois had gone insane. She intended to die together with me. As expected, her previous compromise was only to numb your senses. Women are creatures whose emotions are even more important than their lives. Silly cat, why are you pretending to be an expert? At most, you're a female cat, not a woman. But for some reason, perhaps I was fated to be in love. Recently, there have been so many women who wanted to kill me. That's not what fated to be in love means. Cough. If there's a problem, don't always blame luck. Please first look at your own character. You're so skilled at attracting hatred, so don't blame the pitiful god of fate. 2 pairs of eyes were staring at me, one from the front and one from above. 2 beautiful women were intending to die together with me, without a doubt. I suddenly felt rather excited. Hey, isn't this the wrong style? We're about to die, so why are you getting excited? Can't you be a little more serious with your narration? It's going to kill me. I didn't waste any more time. At that moment, conservation entered a high-speed spell-casting state and cast several spells. Some of them healed and buffed Lasnina, while some of them cast negative undead curses on me. Even though she knew that spatial magic wouldn't be able to stop me from leaving, she still cast dimensional anchors, speed reduction spells, and so on. You damn bitch, when I get out of here, I'm going to lock you up for half a year. Then you need to survive first. Hee hee. Conservation smiled like a blooming night lily, intelligent and confident. This was the first time I had ever seen her smile. It was rather cute, but she was looking forward to my death, which made it difficult for me to be happy. Crazy woman. I didn't teleport away. Instead, I suddenly shouted loudly after raising my hands high in the air. Fire at me! At that moment, all the mage towers and cannons in Yonya City lit up. Countless cannons and fireballs all shot towards conservation. There was no helping it. I wanted to attack Lasnina as well, but I had already set a keyword for her, so I could only attack the target I had set. You two are so dirty. The sky was filled with fireworks. Even Harlois couldn't bear to watch anymore. It would seem that the two undead emperors who had already signed a large number of alliance agreements with each other had always wanted to kill each other. I didn't have the time to play around with the silly cat anymore. After Lasnina confirmed that the powerful existence in the sky was truly at odds with me, she unhesitatingly launched a fatal ambush. Chapter 588. Return. I unhesitatingly returned from my personal bug-like world. I had already torn all pretense of cordiality with conservation. If I stayed here any longer, I would only be waiting to be surrounded and attacked. That wouldn't even be foolish anymore. It would be suicidal. The next instant, I appeared in the sky above Yellow Sand City by myself. Countless aerial knight and mages were around me, confused as to what was going on. They had received an emergency alarm and flew into the sky. However, the culprit had suddenly vanished. The young knight that appeared before them seemed to be a friend, not an enemy. The leading aerial knight tried to ask what had happened. Your Excellency, back off. It's not over yet. His cautious question was met with an angry reprimand. The yellow-crowned aerial knight's face showed anger, but before he could say anything dissatisfied, he lost the ability to speak. The leading aerial knight clutched his own throat as his eyes rolled back into his head, and he started foaming at the mouth. He didn't even have the chance to scream before he was directly killed by himself. The other mages and aerial knight had the same fate. They either pulled out their swords and committed suicide, or crushed their vitals. All of them died pitiful deaths as they mysteriously fell from the sky. What kind of curse is this? Who knows? Curses aren't the elves' specialty in magic. Perhaps it's just the remnant power of a domain. They don't have magic resistance like you do. I suddenly understood. The aura of the curse was still lingering in the sky. Although Lasnina's cursed creatures had been dragged into that world, just the remnant power left behind would be far beyond what these novice tieflings could deal with. This was just like fighting against an ice mage or the water elemental god. Perhaps the two would be fine, but the people affected would either freeze to death, die from water disasters, or die from exhaustion. The city below was now in a panic. Large numbers of people abandoned everything and madly ran out of the city. In the eyes of an experienced elderly person, this city was hopeless since two powerful existences from the mortal plane had chosen it as their battlefield. TSK. I was quite displeased as I flapped my wings and flew into the clouds. Roland. As expected, Lasnina's reaction appeared behind me the very next moment. That world didn't have the ability to trap anyone. Lasnina only needed about 10 seconds to find her way. Originally, I only wanted to change the battlefield, but when I stepped into the clouds, a sudden thought made me pause. Ice magic is an advanced form of water magic. In the magic theories of the HE world, although there is no cloud magic, dark clouds are indeed an extension of water magic. Perhaps he stepped into the clouds, condensed the water vapor into ice, and casually shot backwards. Roland! The roar behind me seemed to indicate that I had hit something. Hence, I specifically traveled through the clouds. Wherever I passed by, it was as if flowers were blooming. There was a rain of ice needles, and ice bullets. The ice crystals that I could summon at any time wouldn't have much killing power. However, I had never hoped that I would be able to kill Lasnina so easily. Why need is just row? Lawn coward. Lasnina herself didn't seem to notice anything at all. Doubtlessly, my freezing aura had already been effective. Her sense of time had been slowed down. Still, just this alone wasn't enough to make up for the absolute difference in power levels between us. I had left my ice magic in the clouds. Every time I pierced through Lasnina, the freezing aura would bring her closer to death. Perhaps I had found a new battle tactic that would be quite effective. The slowing down of time naturally greatly reduced Lasnina's speed. Meanwhile, I intentionally slowed down and maintained some distance between us. This was the most basic kiting tactic that Lasnina couldn't catch up to. I can't catch up. Has my speed been slowed down? Lasnina dripped a drop of blood into the air. Seeing that it was falling down faster than she expected, she was certain that her sense of time had been slowed down. Her stuttering words were rather comical, but they revealed astonishing information. Did she know about my abilities? That was impossible. My combat characteristics and abilities were all top secret. Anyone who had ever seen my freezing aura should be dead. No, there were still some who were alive and well. Conservation. There was no need to think too much about it. Even though I hadn't revealed my abilities yet, I had already revealed many of my abilities during my 2 fights against conservation. The loss of information put me on the defensive. My plan to set up a trap to kill Lasnina was now ruined. Lasnina now had the initiative. What would Lasnina do if she knew that her sense of time had been messed up? Would she charge up and attack me? That would be a huge disadvantage. Would she dodge and wait for the effects to wear off? Then I would have long since fled. My senses were constantly locked onto the person following me. At that moment, Lasnina's aura suddenly weakened and vanished without a trace. She then reappeared, but this time, she seemed to be much weaker. Suicide? Or did she tear off a part of herself? I couldn't tell. Lasnina seemed to have broken free from the freezing aura's influence. But no matter what, it was always best to keep my distance. If she wanted to catch up to me, she would have to suffer another slowing down of time. Suddenly, Lasnina turned around and flew back in the direction she had come from. Was she going back to find Sand City? Who do you think I am? Would Yonya care about the lives of these small fries? That woman said that you know how to. Yonya is far weaker than an ordinary undead emperor. I can't believe that he would actually sympathize and like mortals. At this moment, I finally understood the saying that the person who understood you the most would always be your enemy. Damn it! Just as I was about to turn around, I suddenly tumbled 3 times in a row. A magic sword that reached out from the clouds almost pierced through my heart. A blood-red venomous snake reached out from the clouds. Her sudden attack was swift and accurate, as if she had long since locked onto my location and was waiting to ambush me. As I glanced around, I saw Lasnina's figure in the clouds. The bone fire skull in her hand had a cross-shaped hellfire that was locked onto me. This was a magical compass that had locked onto my life aura. Conservation. Does she really have to hate me so much? It was obvious that Conservation knew that I could leave this world at any moment. It would be quite difficult for her to take me down with her. From the very start, she had hoped that I would ask for her help if I met a powerful enemy. She had prepared a method to help me. Of course, she would help my enemy, even if she had to die with her. Information, small tools, and what else? This time, I had shot myself in the foot. I had underestimated Conservation's hatred for me. Women were truly mystical creatures that didn't have any sense of reason. Let's go all out. Harloise flew up by herself. She also knew that the current situation was quite bad. Was she intending to attack? Not only were we facing Lasnina, we were also facing Conservation's abilities. It would be impossible to not be careful. Roland, Little Red's balls are moving. Chapter 589. There were 3 major misconceptions in life. Someone's looking for me. My cell phone rang. She likes me. I can counterattack. But when Harloise informed me that Little Red had actually woken up at this time, I became certain that this wasn't a misconception. My chance has come. I really can counterattack. I was quite familiar with Little Red's power level. The foundational part of leveling up was to retain most of one's previous power level. Most people would only become stronger. In that case, if I worked together with Little Red, it was highly likely that I would be able to counterattack. The dragon egg in my backpack kept jumping about. Its fiery red mana waves kept jumping about like ocean waves. Its powerful life force was like a volcano about to erupt. There was no mistaking it. Little Red had finished leveling up and was about to break out of her egg. I grit my teeth and tossed the dragon egg out as I watched my pursuers get closer and closer. Las Nina hurriedly dodged due to the incredibly high magical reaction. She also needed to be on guard against forbidden spell scrolls or magical explosion crystals. "It's you, the Iron Tyrannosaurus, little fire dragon." As I expected, fiery clouds covered the dragon egg in the sky. What appeared in the sky was a mighty and domineering little fire dragon. Its body was less than 5 meters long, and it had a round belly and head. Its red dragon wings were flapping slowly, and when it yawned, it spat out a small flame. It was indeed a cute little fire dragon. Mises? The confused little fire dragon turned its head in confusion. It was as if a bean-sized question mark had appeared on its head. No matter what her leveling up was, there was obviously something wrong with her cute appearance, wasn't there? An abnormal silence appeared on the battlefield. But the next instant, viper-shaped magical blades covered the entire sky. Las Nina definitely wouldn't be in a daze on the battlefield. Little Red, who had just recovered from her daze, paused in surprise when she saw the vicious Demonis approaching her. Then she started panicking. GAA. What a strange word. Could it be that Little Red was so shocked that she lost the ability to speak? Damn it. I was also astonished by this sudden development. However, I knew that if I waited a few more seconds, it would have been murder. A silver sword light clashed violently against the blood-red magic sword. The dragon-armored knight charged right in front of Las Nina's little fire dragon. This was the first time that Las Nina and I had ever faced each other head-on. He didn't even need to raise his head to see that the sky was filled with whip marks, and behind him was a dense horde of cursed creatures. It had only been an instant since they started fighting, but he was already at a disadvantage. Too fast. Las Nina's magic sword had already surpassed the limits of what ordinary creatures could react to. Even a top-level human martial artist, a sword saint, would be nothing in front of a devil lord who had trained for thousands of years. The scene of a one-sided beating played out once again. The magic sword was like a whip that was everywhere. It was just as disgusting as Las Nina's maniacal laughter. The next moment, an ice wall appeared in front of me. Although it was instantly shattered by the magic sword, it gave me a chance to catch my breath. I didn't have the ability to forcefully cast a spell while being attacked by a devil lord. Red fireballs, black gravity bombs, and snow-white ice bombs. In that instant, the entire sky was filled with all kinds of offensive spells. Harloise. I turned around and looked at Harloise. Perhaps it was because her opponent this time was far too troublesome, or perhaps it was because Harloise finally had enough power, but the flying black cat was floating in midair. The several dozen magic arrays behind her kept spitting out all kinds of magic balls. The black cat with bat wings seemed just like a witch from a Western fairy tale. She was holding a small magic wand in one of her paws and constantly waving it around. She also wore a magical hat and a small cape that buffed her strength. Her other paw kept flashing as she held a silver magical sand. She looked rather comical, but even more so, cute. The several dozen magic arrays kept spinning as if they were alive. However, they were actually under the cat's control as they collided with each other and changed. Fireballs, flame explosion, great fire all, fire array, dragon breath, lightning strike, lightning ball, and chain lightning. These magic arrays were all of the same power level, but they were now higher-level offensive spells. The most inconceivable part was that these magic arrays actually didn't use up any of her mana at all. Instead, they entered an endless cycle of their own. Harloise's attack helped me regain my senses. The silly cat was now at the myth rank and was no weaker than she had been in the past. When considering her past experiences and age, it was likely that she had already surpassed Little Red. A magical version of a perpetual motion machine? What kind of joke is that? It's just a simple application of the balance of the four elements. Stop studying it. It's not like you'll ever be able to learn it in your entire lifetime. Harloise had added even more tricks to the ordinary low-level elemental spells. Just by looking at them, she was able to tell that they were far beyond the ordinary four elements. She had high-level elven secret moon, star magic, alchemist metal decomposition and disintegration magic, and troll, which doctors witchcraft curses. Now that the silly cat was no longer restricted by her undead body, Harloise was able to unleash all of her accumulated power over tens of thousands of years. The sky was filled with magic bullets of various colors, making it seem like an exhibition of all magic systems. Every type of magic came from a different magic system. Different magic bullets would require different methods of dealing with them. Delayed explosions, curved attacks, cluster bombs, ricocheting bombs, and so on. The sky became a drawing board that a willful child was casually scribbling on. I looked at the dizzying magic arrays and magic spells that filled the sky. Although most of them were mid-level and low-level spells that were no higher than the fourth circle, I was still unable to understand more than half of them. I once again confirmed why Harloise was called the All-Knowing One. Perhaps this silly cat had been limited by her power level for so many years, and it was finally time for her to make a comeback. Even an entire angel army would be instantly annihilated by such a large-scale cannon fire. However, a devil lord would be far more difficult to deal with than an angel army. Lasnina's berserk magic sword began to casually tear open dimensional cracks as countless cursed creatures fell from them. Some of these cursed creatures became Lasnina's meat shields, while others actively welcomed the magic spells and began devouring the pure mana. Perhaps special methods would be required to deal with these magic spells directly, but summoning cannon fodder to sacrifice themselves seemed to be the simplest and most violent method. Harloise seemed to know that her magic bullets would be unable to pose any fatal threat to Lasnina. She simply continued to chant an incantation. However, Harloise was angrily rebuking her through our soul connection. "Idiot, don't just stand there and watch. Can't you see that I'm chanting an incantation? Go and act as a cannon fodder, or a meat shield." All right, my sword techniques were being suppressed, and my mana level was being suppressed. It seemed that my most useful ability right now was my turtle shell. I smiled wryly as I instantly appeared in front of Lasnina. It seemed that I would have to act as a meat shield after all. At this moment, the previously forgotten little fire dragon, Little Red, suddenly appeared in front of Lasnina and spat out a fireball. Chapter 590. In their own words, the dragons leveling up was an improvement in their natural talents brought about by natural selection. In the eyes of mages, it was a type of specific evolution that started from within their genes. Perhaps a more crude way of describing it would be the most practical. Go back to your mother's womb and reconstruct yourself. This was a type of choice. Naturally, there would be an improvement as well as a regression. After leveling up, the dragons would fight as if they were a completely different dragon. However, most situations were still predictable. The great majority of leveling up would strengthen their strengths and make up for their weaknesses. And for dragons, who had no weaknesses to begin with, strengthening their strengths would be the most obvious. What type of leveling up will Little Red choose? Even if I didn't ask her, I could faintly guess that this was directly related to her personal talent. Dragons' physical combat and magical abilities would improve as they grew older. This unique advantage of their species also made them lack the motivation to work hard at cultivation. I've spent more than 100 years painstakingly studying magic, but the amount of magical knowledge I've obtained is less than 200 years' worth of mana just by taking a nap and sleeping. Why am I working so hard? The world had always been unfair. Some races had individuals that were born weak and had short lifespans. They needed to pass down their legacies and cultivate to become stronger. Some races were born at the top of the food chain, but they naturally lost the spirit to improve. However, Little Red was somewhat different. Ein Mises, Varen's destroyer, immemorial red dragon, dragon queen, and wind and fire dual-element grandmaster. She seemed to be well-versed in both the pen and the sword, but it was actually quite obvious that she was a dragon. The dragon's martial arts techniques: wing sweep, tail sweep, sharp fangs and claws, and at worst, vicious dog pounce and lazy donkey roll. Calling them martial arts techniques would probably make other species warriors want to cry. But with their species' natural talents of great physical strength, even other species sword saints might not be able to defeat them. After all, martial arts techniques were essentially techniques that used the physical body. If the difference in physical strength was too great for martial arts techniques to make up for, then no amount of training would be of any use. Techniques needed to be inherited and practiced in actual combat. Dragons' martial arts techniques relied more on their natural talents, which naturally wouldn't be enough to satisfy Little Red, who desperately needed power to complete her revenge. Little Red was able to defeat Molly, who was much older than her, in melee combat due to her roguelike equipment and the advantages of being young and energetic. But looking at it from a melee combat standpoint, Little Red was no different from other dragons who relied on their natural talents. Even though red dragons were considered combat experts among dragons, there was still no foundational difference between Little Red and Molly. The only difference was that red dragons had faster reactions, sharper claws, and thicker skin. This was also the foundational reason why giants of the same power level would always be able to defeat dragons. Since there was not much of a difference in physical conditions, humanoid creatures that used tools, techniques, and brains to fight had an obvious advantage over beasts that relied on their instincts. Of course, as the dragons grew older, these small problems would no longer be a problem. Moreover, the advancement of the dragons would also make their already ridiculous bodies even more ridiculous, which could be considered as forcefully making up for their flaws. Little Red had never had the habit of sleeping in and waiting to become stronger. She spent all her time and energy on wind and fire magic. Fire magic was the foundational magic of red dragons. Red dragons were born as the strongest fire-type creatures in all of Ike's mortal planes. Red dragons were also capable of increasing their magic power in their sleep. However, not only did red dragons have no advantage when it came to wind-type magic, their powerful fire-type magic would also affect their control over wind-type magic. It was likely that red dragons would have to spend several times more effort to reach the standard of other species. Very few people knew that Little Red's fire magic had faintly reached the level of myth-ranked human mages. Not only that, her wind magic was even higher than that. In the mage country, Little Red would also be able to reach the level of a truth symposium mage with the advantage of dual cultivation. Plus, Little Red's mana reserves far surpassed that of ordinary human mages by several dozen times. Out of the 4 elements, 1 + 1 would be greater than 3 when used together. Wind and fire magic were both experts in arson. If Little Red used a forbidden spell with both elements, it would basically be an unsalvageable super forbidden spell. I thought that Little Red didn't have many opportunities to cast spells because her dual cultivation magic was far too destructive. If she wasn't careful, then Sulphur Mountain City would be burned down. At the very least, when we were adventuring, we often had to run away in the middle of the night because of the fire she caused. During our adventuring, Little Red's area of effect attack power far surpassed everyone else's. She was a true large-scale killing machine, and she also helped me and Adam a lot. There was no helping it, as we were supposed to be meat shields. In real life, there was no such thing as teammate protection. The frontliners would always be the ones taking fire for both sides. The seemingly young fire dragon opened her mouth and spat out a dark red fireball with a hint of gold. This round fireball seemed to be physical, and it seemed like a rolling red bead as it flew through the air. Although it seemed small and exquisite, the energy contained within it far surpassed that of any mortal mage's highest level 9th circle spell. Shing. The twisted, cursed creature acted as an expendable meat shield in front of the fireball. However, the fireball silently pierced through it. The equally powerful twisted creature didn't even get a chance to scream before it was directly pierced through. This seemingly cute and harmless fireball didn't seem to receive any resistance at all. It continued to approach Lasnina at a seemingly slow speed. Blood-red liquid dripped down from Lasnina's eyes. Lasnina raised her head and opened her eyes, which had now become 2 empty sockets. She opened her mouth and screamed soundlessly. The next instant, the entire world began to shake as if countless banshees were singing death cries right next to my ears. Numerous cursed creatures jumped out of dimensional cracks. These disgusting and smelly creatures piled up into a disgusting mountain of flesh. If one isn't enough, then let's use even more. Although this was quite a simple way of thinking, it was quite effective most of the time. Using cannon fodder to exhaust the enemy's magic was already a common tactic. As long as there was enough cannon fodder, even the strongest incantation or magic would be exhausted. As expected, the round fireball pierced through another cursed creature, then two, and finally shattered when it reached the seventh cursed creature. And then asterisk boom. Asterisk after a thunderous explosion. It was as if a volcano was erupting. Sparks flew several hundred meters high and were quite eye-catching. However, the thunderstorm and chain lightning mixed within were even more fatal and dangerous. Large numbers of cursed creatures were either roasted into black ash or electrocuted to death. They all died in large numbers. This seemingly simple fireball was actually a composite forbidden spell that had been repeatedly compressed and accumulated. Judging from the power of this attack alone, Little Red hadn't failed in her attempt to level up. However, Lasnina smiled cruelly. No matter how powerful this attack was, even if more than half of her summoned creatures had been sacrificed, it had at least managed to stop her. The next instant, however, her smile froze over. The little red dragon opened its mouth and spat out a small fireball that was exactly the same as the previous one. Before Lasnina could summon another meat shield, Little Red took another deep breath and spat out another fireball, 2 fireballs, 3 fireballs, 10 fireballs, 100 fireballs. By the time Little Red finally stopped with smoke coming out her mouth, there were already several thousand fireballs in the sky. Just like a swarm of bees, the fireballs seemed slow, but were actually quite fast as they chased after Lasnina. And then there was Lasnina was completely unable to use teleportation magic to escape due to the restrictions of Harlow's dimensional anchor spell. When a swarm of fireballs caught up to Lasnina's target, countless explosions filled Lasnina's eyes of despair. If Lasnina's earlier curse had been shaking the world, then Little Red's chain of fireballs would have been destroying the world. Moments later, when the smoke and thunder dissipated, only a pitch-black spatial crack remained. The scene outside the crack was nothing but endless darkness and nothingness. Even the chaos abyss, which was famed for its sturdiness, was unable to withstand such a furious bombardment. Even if conservation had revealed information about me, it would be impossible for her to have information about Harlow's and the newly evolved Little Red. Where's Lasnina? Did she go back and revive already? The next instant, a snake blade extended from the spatial crack and answered my question. Asterisk clang. Asterisk a sneak attack would be meaningless against me. After our swords clashed, I discovered to my delight that my opponent was weakened. I let go of my right hand and grabbed my sword with my left hand. I pulled, and a black item was pulled out. The Devil Lord that had been hiding in the darkness was pulled out as if she was fishing a fish. Her current appearance was quite unsightly. Only half of her body remained, and more than half of her head remained. She had lost both hands, and her snake blade was only wrapped around her arm. But at this moment, those empty eye sockets were still glaring at me. The hatred in them were endless. Kill me, and then I'll come back for revenge. This was a resolute will that didn't need to be doubted. It was also the most disgusting part about devils and demons. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, and I'll drink you up. But how could I possibly give such a difficult opponent a second chance? Perhaps I was only a low-level mage, but I had a very, very high-level magic that I was probably the best at in the world. And this magic was the natural enemy of all existences that were indestructible. Seal of the 4 elements, the mana in my right hand was pure ice elemental power. However, after some adjustments, it transformed into the elemental power of water. Little Red Dragon opened her mouth wide. The Crimson Magic Array and the Cyan Magic Array brought about the elemental power of wind and elemental power of fire. As for the final elemental power of earth, Harlow's, who was an all-element mage, would provide me with that. Naturally, there was a huge difference in difficulty between a single boss and a group boss. Sleep for me until the next, and the next century. The four elemental elemental power was connected to each other. Thousands of mana threads connected to each other, and the balance of the elements reached a state of harmony. Lost Nina had an expression of disbelief as the four elemental powers devoured her, and the dimensional crack in the world began to close. The seal of the four elements, which had been improved over and over again, had already surpassed the Creator Goddess' original version. It was likely that even until the next century, the Devil Lord's throne would still be empty. The next second, all the Devil Lords were either astonished or terrified. They instinctively sensed that the Lord of Curse's throne would be empty for an extended period of time. Lost Nina? She disappeared? Chapter 591. This was a translucent crystal gem that was only the size of a walnut. Under the sunlight, it reflected all the colors of the rainbow. At the core of the gem was a transparent female figure that was currently sleeping peacefully. Her usual devilish beauty was now so calm, as if she was an angel in a beautiful dream. This gem was far more beautiful than any natural or magical gem. Natural light reflected from it gave off the flavor of holy light. Words like purity, kindness, and holy item were probably created just for this gem. Lost Nina's cursed gem, god-level mystical item. It represents the source of all curses in the world of He. Lost Nina, the Lord of Curses, is sealed within this gem. The devils would definitely be willing to pay several dimensional levels worth of wealth in exchange for her. Of course, your head is also included. P.S. If you offer this gem to the glorious system, you'll receive an interest-free loan of 10,000 fate points. Even though this gem was made of the dirtiest material, it looks so holy and beautiful. If it wasn't for the fact that my system was always so mischievous and immoral, I would have never dared to believe it. This beautiful gem attracted the gazes of countless females as I placed it in my palm. The dragon and cat nearby wiped their drool. Forget about Little Red, as it was natural for her to like shiny things. But why was the silly cat getting involved? I'm going to sue you for racial discrimination. Isn't jewelry supposed to be a gift from the heavens to women? I strongly demand a salary and a bonus. You black-hearted boss, I've already worked for you for several hundred years, and you haven't even paid me a single cent actually, including the Yonya era. The past several hundred years had all been true. But who in the undead army had ever been paid a salary? I finally understood why the evil factions were always unable to defeat the regular armies. They didn't receive any salary or benefits. If they won, they wouldn't receive any bonuses. If they lost, they might even obtain freedom and a new identity. Such an army naturally had no motivation. I retracted my thoughts as I waved my hand in boredom. I told her to go play wherever she wanted to play. Weren't magical pets supposed to be mages' lifelong free laborers that didn't need to be paid? If she wanted Robbie Luo to give her a salary, that would probably happen in her next life. And then, as always, a cat had appeared on my head. Once the seal of the four elements was completed, it would seal that existence into an artifact. And that artifact would likely have many wondrous uses. For example, the fire elemental seal back in the day would constantly leak fire elemental power and become an eternally active volcano. When considering Lost Nina's abilities, even though this gemstone seemed astonishingly charming, an ordinary person would die within a week at most if they tried to use it. I was certain that the reason why the three women desired this gemstone so much wasn't because of its characteristics. It said that Lost Nina was born as a fallen angel. I didn't expect the legend to be true. A single Devil Lord's sealing stone is already so beautiful. If I could find a bunch of them and make them into necklaces, a group necklace, there were only 4 of them left in the entire world. They were extremely rare. You can't indiscriminately catch rare species. Of course, they were just saying that. Lost Nina's sealing stone was only like this because of her personal characteristics. He placed the gemstone on top of his head, and the radiance that penetrated through was colorful. Maybe we really need to collect a few more devil stones. Looking at this penetrating radiance and feeling the power contained within it, I couldn't help but mutter. This gem has a light attribute? Why do I only feel pure curse power? I shook my head. In the natural world, the more beautiful something was, the more vicious it would be. This gemstone would probably be able to poison an entire city of people to death just by soaking it in water. However, it had nothing to do with the light attribute at all. I need the materials for the other magic sword, the undead sword with the strongest attack power. My greatest undead magic masterpiece was the 7 original sins, which represented the negative emotions of intelligent life forms. The 7 original sins had far too many similarities with the Devil Lords. Since they were both powers that originated from the dark side of the soul and negative emotions, if I could use the Devil Lord's materials to create a sword, perhaps it would be even more effective than using pure undead materials. Since I have the materials, let's try making a mold first. I casually put away the gemstone as well as the shards on the ground in a snakeskin bag. These shards were probably the most valuable shards in the world. There were more than a dozen black and red shards. Some were rusty, and some were covered in dust. Magic sword Sastia, snake tail whipper. The moment that Lasnina collapsed, countless vengeful souls escaped from the sword. That scene was even more spectacular than any forbidden spell. That was all that was left of this god equipment. The demon sword had already fused with Lasnina. After Lasnina was sealed away, the soul material that was originally bound by the demon sword naturally regained its freedom, and the demon sword that was left behind naturally disintegrated into pieces. Many myth-ranked and semi-god individuals who died unnaturally would have their myth-ranked weapons damaged as a part of their bodies. But even so, this was still an excellent material, especially since I had Lasnina's soulstone in my possession. Now, as long as I used this soulstone as the core, I could create a mana cycle and then use the magic sword shards as the sword's blade. I could expect that I would be able to restore at least 40% of my original power. I strongly protest against the black-hearted team leader for stealing my equipment. Not only did you not split the equipment after defeating a boss, you even stole a necklace exclusive to women. You bastard team leader for stealing gold and equipment. Give me back my hard-earned money. I picked up the silly cat who was protesting while holding a sign and casually tossed it away. That's right, there was an additional benefit to doing this. As long as this soulstone became a part of my magic sword, it was likely that Lasnina wouldn't even have a chance to escape before my lifespan ended. If only I could gather a few Devil Lords. Perhaps I'll die even more spectacularly than Lasnina's death. I turned around and saw that a certain someone was still eagerly looking at the soulstone. Yep, a certain person, a certain dragon. I finally couldn't help but chuckle out loud. Haha, I'm Mises. Are you intending on pretending to be a lowly and sneaking into an adventuring team again? You still haven't thrown away your dragon princess adventures in the human world? Currently, Little Red was so angry that her face was completely red. She appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old. She was standing on her tiptoes and doing her best to maintain the dignity of dragons that had long since disappeared. She was also carefully wrapping up her small body with a tattered piece of cloth. The greatest contributor to our victory, the glorious red dragon Mises, was currently a young girl who was doing her best to hold onto the cloth so that she wouldn't be exposed. How would I have known that this evolution would result in me becoming a dragon egg again? Damn dragon gods. They didn't even explain this clearly in their inheritance. The energy-devouring rainbow dragon was the dragon that Mises had chosen to evolve into. And since she had obtained the dragon god's inheritance, she was especially thorough in her evolution. She was especially thorough in reconstructing herself in her mother's womb. Dragon egg, young dragon, young dragon, young dragon, adult dragon, old dragon, extremely old dragon, immemorial dragon. Little Red instantly became the main character of her story of rebirth. Of course, dragons still had their source power, so it would be quite fast for them to evolve from the beginning again. It took Little Red X thousands of years to reach this step and become an immemorial dragon from the beginning again. If it was purely natural growth, it would probably only take slightly more than 100 years. Perhaps this was nothing more than a rather long afternoon nap for dragons. But for Ein Mises, who had long since given up on eternal sleep, this was a nightmare. Ha ha! Don't you like naughty children? This time, you could be a naughty child on your own. Is this the proverb of looking for a mummy, but becoming a mummy yourself? Wait a moment, what are you doing? That fireball is going to kill someone. The age of one's physical body would imperceptibly affect many things. It was indeed rather dangerous for a naughty child to spit out fire like a dragon. But when I turned around and saw Little Red's current appearance, I stretched out my hand and gestured to her waist, causing me to smile proudly. At the very least, the current Ein Mises would probably be especially suited for lace princess dresses for quite a long period of time. And then, with a sky full of fireballs as proof, my taunt succeeded. Hey, if you keep burning, I'm really going to turn on you. I'm a nemesis of naughty children in Sulphur Mountain City. Be careful that I don't steal your lollipop. But when the little princess, who had tears in her eyes, spat out a dozen compressed fireballs, I decided to behave myself. Yep, when I meet up with Adam and the others in 2 days, we'll have a celebration party together. It's better to have fun together than to have fun alone. Everyone should be happy together. Little Red is so pitiful. No matter which bar you're having your celebration party in, it's probably already destined to become ruins. I did my best to keep a straight face, but when I saw that angry little face of hers, I couldn't help but laugh out loud at the thought of the mature woman in the past. After a while, under the threat of those abnormal fireballs, I took 2 deep breaths. I had had enough fun. Sorry. You can ask Marguerite to make something like a time necklace or something. Hearing this, Little Red paused in surprise. Her face was filled with a look of damn, it's that easy? Why didn't I think of that just now? In the next instant, she looked at me with a threatening gaze. You should have one on you, right? Robbery. Let me use it first. Don't even think about it. Just wait to be mocked by Adam and the others. Just watch how you mock me back then. I'll return it to you. I'll return it to you 10 times over. Wahaha. Chapter 592. Chaos would forever be the main theme of the Chaos Abyss. But no matter how chaotic a place was, there would always be a relatively safe place. The Ashen Furnace was a city located in the Ashen Plains, the 100th level of the Chaos Abyss. It was a place that all dimensional travelers had to pass through. The Ashen Furnace was a land of giants. The roofs of the gigantic metal houses couldn't be seen, and the endless giant houses covered half of the plain. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but a twisted gray and black metal sky. Along with the constant thick smoke and metal clanking sounds, the entire city was like a gigantic furnace. Some people said that this was the Titan Giants' ruins, but these houses were too large for the Titan Giants to live in. Some people said that this was a part of the mechanical plane, but they were unable to explain why a pure land of Order's mechanical plane would appear in the Chaos Abyss. Just how many residents lived here? Nobody would be able to answer. The city had no city walls or borders, nor was there any need for them. It was just a small extension of the city. If you wanted to walk out on your own, you would need to prepare to die here for the rest of your life. It was said that the city was split into several thousand regions. Each region was no smaller than a human country. Each region had its own rules and main species. Sometimes, a metal shack would be the capital of a small species. There were no demon lords here. Instead, there were countless dark bosses sent here by countless factions. There were no laws or rules here, but very few adventurers here were weak. Being able to reach the depths of the Chaos Abyss was already proof of one's strength. This was a paradise for adventurers. Countless dimensional travelers would gather in the rivers of the Chaos Abyss. Countless miracles awaited them. Of course, the Lady of Misfortune would always come more often than the Goddess of Luck. Every year, countless new adventurers would disappear into the sewers and sewers of this mega city. And today, just like in the past, a new adventurer arrived, the 100th level of the Chaos Abyss, the 11th District's Dragonale Bar. I should be arriving soon, after I killed off the 3rd local hoodlum who pretended to be a kind-hearted person, and before Little Red lost her patience and killed off the 13th kidnapper. I felt like I had found the way. By the way, wasn't she just a young girl? Why were there so many gentlemen in this day and age? No, a true gentleman should only watch from afar. Anyone who dared to reach out to her didn't deserve the reputation of a gentleman. They deserved to have their third leg kicked off by Little Red. Although I don't know why you suddenly have such a proud expression, let me remind you, this is already the 5th time you've said that you've found the way. And the first 4 times, you've caused trouble. Heloise yawned. The first time, I walked into the territory of the Dark Elves. The second time, I walked into the lair of the Frost Giants. The third time, I barged into the Dark Cultists' illegal, sacrificial ritual. Aren't there only 3 times? Have you forgotten about the Holy Night? Look at how crazy they are. If you hadn't thrown out the Holy Light in time, they would have killed you. Now that I mention this, I suddenly recalled that I had actually met an entire squadron of Holy Night Knights in the Chaos Abyss. This was truly a miraculous encounter. It was just that they seemed to be overly nervous. The moment I got close to them, they immediately drew their swords and attacked me. It was likely that the local residents of the Chaos Abyss had made them suffer. Even though I told them that I was a holy knight, they still didn't seem to have any intention of getting close to me. Their gazes were filled with vigilance, which was rather surprising. After all, no matter which god they served, or if they simply believed in the holy light, Holy Night Knights would always have a good relationship with each other due to the mutual understanding and respect between devout believers. Friends who could talk about how they were poor and didn't have any girls with them and complain about why they chose the wrong profession back in the day would easily ignite a mysterious spark between them. It's probably an order from some god. They sent out more than 30 silver rank Holy Night Knights, 1 semi-god rank, and 2 myth rank knights at once. How generous. The holy emblems on these Holy Night Knights' armor and weapons had all been erased. This meant that not only were these holy knights here on a highly dangerous mission, they were also nameless knights that nobody would acknowledge or claim their bodies after they died. For a holy knight job class that valued honor above all else, this meant that they viewed the success or failure of their mission as more important than their own lives and honor. I was rather curious as to why a group of holy night knights would abandon everything and come to the Chaos Abyss to die. Yep, I was just curious. I didn't intend to cause any trouble. I didn't see any clones of Heloise sneaking over. Is there any news? No. Those Holy Night Knights are so cautious that they don't even seem like Holy Night Knights. They didn't say anything at all. But judging from how they're constantly searching, they must be searching for something. In a city of chaos, power was the only way to pass. I wasn't in a hurry to meet up with Adam and the others, because according to the schedule, they were most likely still on the way. It would be quite interesting to take a stroll around this chaotic city with so many different species and cultures. However, our leisure time was once again interrupted by a blood-curdling scream. Oh, woo! I turned around to see a furry fellow rolling on the ground. Little Red was constantly kicking it with her tiny feet. The 14th? It sounds like a werewolf. Yep, if she kicks it a few more times, it'll probably become a pig-headed human. 16. Just now, an ogre and a berserker demon had their lower limbs broken. I could only helplessly shake my head as I looked at the increasingly angry dragon girl. It would have been fine if Little Red had chosen to transform into an elf or a beast man. However, a young human girl with soft skin and tender flesh would be quite rare in the Chaos Abyss. It wasn't that there weren't any young human girls who were incredibly powerful. However, this young human girl was only wearing a tattered piece of cloth and silently following behind a man. She looked just like a little slave who was following a slave trader. This wasn't because I had some sort of weird sense of humor. It was just that Little Red's body had changed so much that she couldn't even wear her original clothes anymore. In order to avoid any possible devil lords, we had been hurrying all the way here, so we hadn't had the time to buy some children's clothing. Little Red was still wearing that tattered cloth. Ever since we entered this city, Little Red had always lowered her head while facing the gazes of the other races. She didn't say a single word as she slowly followed me. She looked like a timid and weak little girl, which attracted the attention of the human traffickers. Actually, she was walking slowly because she had to cover her tattered cloth. Any wind would cause her to expose herself. She kept her head lowered and didn't say anything because she was furious. She was doing her best to suppress her draconic aura. Her lowered eyes had long since transformed into dragon eyes filled with flames that could shoot out beams of light at any moment. For the sake of my personal safety, I decided to stay far away from her. You're taking revenge, aren't you? I refuse to believe that it's such a coincidence that we didn't run into a single tailor shop on the way here. Also, you just happened to burn all your spare clothes while you were fooling around. That's right, I'm taking revenge. It's her fault for trying to make me become a laughingstock as well. After that day, we went through a difficult war and negotiation in order to fight for the right to become adults. In the end, we won by saying, "All your food is in my dimensional storage bag. Do you intend to starve to death in your flat young dragon form?" That was the shame of being a female dragon. As my trump card, I obtained victory. But how could I be at ease if I didn't find a chance to take revenge? Actually, she could have just transformed into a young dragon. I was greatly astonished and hurriedly used our soul connection to stop Harloise from saying anything. Please don't say anything. I know, she's probably at the critical point right now. If she learns that all her suffering was unnecessary and that she was most likely set up by you, she'll definitely explode in anger. I shook my head. That wasn't what I was thinking. Little Red was someone who would easily go to a dead end. Let's wait until we reach the Dragontail Tavern before telling her. That'll be much more dramatic. The silly cat paused in surprise before shaking her head helplessly. She was too lazy to participate in such a boring exchange between elementary school students. I didn't ask for directions because revealing my destination to the residents here was obviously unwise. I had already been to the Dragontail Tavern twice. I should be able to find it if I looked around a bit more. Are you certain that you're not intending to trick Little Red a bit longer? I'm just passing by. I won't be able to trick her for much longer. News travels quite quickly here. Soon, there won't be any more idiots coming here to die. News travels quickly? Harloise nodded thoughtfully. She didn't ask further, but she seemed to have realized what I was trying to say. Taverns were highly frequented. Many information peddlers and illegal merchants would set up shop in large taverns and bars. We chose the Dragontail Tavern as our meeting point because it was convenient and fast to obtain information. If we were lucky, we might even be able to use the information peddlers we were familiar with. As veteran adventurers, information was life, especially in an unfamiliar and hostile environment. If Adam and the others had arrived early, they would definitely have gathered information and bribed spies beforehand. Since our physical appearances hadn't changed, they would naturally receive information as soon as we entered the city. The reason why they made things so complicated was because using myself as bait to fish. That's right, we were out in the open while Adam was in the dark. Plus, we were entering the city separately. Those who weren't familiar with us wouldn't even know that we were on the same side. It would be such a pity to give up such a natural advantage. If there were any pursuers behind us, or if some powerful enemy had been waiting for us here for a long time, they would naturally be exposed as long as they sent someone to follow us. For example, I had previously offended devil lords, demon lords, undead emperors, chaos, evil gods. As I counted the possible enemies, I could only sigh at how many friends I had and how many people wanted to die for me. I kept feeling like this was a wise decision. If there was an appropriate opportunity, Adam could also be a backstabbing assassin. What if they didn't come? Or are you just being paranoid, and we don't have any enemies at all? Then let's just treat it as a form of entertainment to make Little Red suffer. At any rate, it's fun, isn't it? As far as the eye could see, Little Red seemed to have finally been enlightened. She began to take off the werewolf's armor, but she wrinkled her little nose after taking a sniff. Without any hesitation, she kicked the beastman's smelly armor into the air. At the same time, Harloise smiled mysteriously. Her eyes had been split into several hundred different parts. These were the perspectives of all the clones she had left behind. The cameras we had left behind all along the way had proved to be effective. The cat that seemed to be napping was actually observing the entire city. At this moment, one scene caught Harloise's attention. Roland, you really weren't paranoid this time. It's probably thanks to your good luck that we managed to catch a whale. Chapter 593. It's actually him? I really didn't expect this. I had many enemies in the Chaos Abyss. I had offended the devils the most. I had just killed Lasnina, so it was only natural that the remaining devil lords would band together to kill me. Apart from that, Sophocles the Deceiver was the most likely to come looking for trouble with me. It was only natural that my bastard younger brother would come looking for me, but I really didn't expect that he would come looking for me. Underneath the gray armor was a steel-like body. The black greatsword on his back was simple and ancient, yet it gave off an aura of existence that was impossible to ignore. This was a chaos main god-level existence, war god Donades. Even though Donades had done his best to hide his divine aura, it was unlikely that this wasn't his true body. However, I had interacted with him in the Hades for so long, and I had collected plenty of information on his soul, magic, and divine power. How could he possibly hide from the greed, Harlois? Why is it him? I was rather astonished. It was very rare for Chaos main gods to appear in the Chaos Abyss. They no longer had any needs or opportunities to improve themselves. They would spend most of their time enjoying their leisure time in their own dimensions. Now that the Chaos Abyss had entered the Holy War, it was highly unlikely that the Chaos Abyss War god, the vanguard of the Chaos Abyss, would hide his true identity and enter this city right after I entered. Since it wasn't a coincidence, then he was most likely here for me. A clone? An incarnation? It's not his true body, but he's definitely not someone that a low god can deal with. I was even more astonished now. If Donades was truly here for me, why would he only send an incarnation? Was he looking down on me? Why did he come here when he should have been fighting to the death on the bloody battlefield? I was unable to understand. Donades hadn't suffered any losses in the Battle of the Hades. He had fought against Bastion for several years before leaving. It was obvious that he hadn't been serious. It could be said that Cynthia had died in front of all these Chaos main gods. Although Donades was fighting against Bastion, he hadn't gone all out. It was evident that this so-called number one Chaos War god definitely wasn't as loyal as the rumors said. He's not the only one. Following Harlois' words, another scene appeared in front of me. Near the city gate, a deformed devil was casually tearing an inferno demon into two, cruelly enjoying the golden blood that flowed from the flames. The bystanders in the background didn't dare to approach because they were afraid of Donades' demonic might. Selah, I nodded as I felt that this is the right style. By the way, I was already so unlucky and used to being hunted down. Once I felt that I was safe, I would immediately feel that something was wrong. Could this illness even be cured? The image in front of him changed again. This time, it was a familiar face. What is that? The red parrot. Ariel? It's Red Yev Vulture Ivla. Others have fallen because of you. At least remember their names. On the screen was a young fallen angel. Her beautiful face was filled with seriousness, and her black wings seemed to be burning with negative energy. Her grayish-black crystal armor was obviously expensive, and the giant flaming blade on her back was at least a legendary item that was not for sale. 7 years had passed, and the Saintess Knight, who was still a little naive when it came to faith, had now become a seasoned veteran. She was followed by a few adventurers who seemed to have some experience. Judging by appearance alone, this fallen angel was far more powerful than the Chaos War God and the Blood War General. Why is she here? I was rather astonished. Back in the day, she should have finished all her correspondence courses in the Northland's Holy Light and Law Academies. She was just like an ordinary Chinibya girl who finally discovered that her past was nothing but a dark history. She embarked on a journey to find herself. I meant a journey to find her true faith. Why did she end up in the Chaos Abyss? Her companions were also of many different species. There were tiefling warriors, elven mages, a purgatory centaur archer, and a dwarf priest. Judging from the shining golden holy emblem, this was probably Mary's high-level priest. This was a standard 5-person team, a common team for adventurers. There were melee and ranged attackers. This team had 5 job classes, and there was also a priest who could heal. It was quite balanced. Don't you think that Centaur looks quite familiar as well? Don't centaurs all look like that? Cassio. When I took a closer look, I finally understood why Cassio's face was so familiar. If I removed his purgatory traits and the beard that covered half his face, wouldn't that be the handsome golden centaur Prince Cassio? Compared to back in the day, Cassio no longer had his exquisite golden half-body armor, nor did he have his eye-catching enchanted bone bow. His simple black chain mail seemed rather plain, and his wooden bow had no decorations or patterns, making him seem even more unsightly. However, Cassio's gaze, which seemed to have been numbed by the passage of time, would give me a strange sense of sharpness if I looked at him for too long. It was as if I was being stared at by a hunting eagle. If I recall correctly, didn't he leave a message and run away? Yep, that message left a deep impression on me. It was one of the top 10 news stories back in the day. I treated him as my brother, my most trustworthy brother. He actually wanted to bed me. I was rendered speechless when I recalled that scandal that caused so much chaos. From a certain standpoint, scaring away his good brother and loyal follower Cassio was one of the main reasons why Beifeng lost his position as the leader of his mercenary group. Back in the day, I must have been insane to have chosen that bastard as the leader of my mercenary group. At the time, I thought that Cassio had returned to the underground world. I even racked my brains to think of an excuse to explain to the old Beastman tribe leader that I was the one who had brought Cassio out of the Chaos Abyss. Yet, the end result was like this. But later on, I heard that Cassio hadn't returned to the underground world or the Beastmen plains. He had left a message saying that he was continuing his adventuring. In just a short 10 years, half of his body had already turned purgatory. It would seem that either he had some miraculous encounter, or he had been living in the Chaos Abyss all this time, and had voluntarily accepted his demonization. This was a 5-member adventurer team, and there were actually 2 familiar faces among them. I was now rather interested. Do you want to greet them? My instincts tell me that they themselves are trouble, great trouble. Even if we just casually come into contact with them, there won't be any room for buffer. You don't care about them? It seems that they're basically fleeing from a disaster. How heartless. Indeed, their expressions were fatigued. Their armor was covered in dust and mud, and their weapons were bloodstained. It was obvious that they hadn't recovered from the battle yet. Forget about the others. Adult elves had racial advantages, which meant that they wouldn't even need to sleep for an entire week. But now, all the elves in this adventurer team were obviously fatigued, which meant that something was off. Let's send one of our clones over to listen first. After reaching the myth rank, Harlow's ability to transform her clones had improved even further. Now, her clones could transform, change colors, and conceal themselves as she pleased. She was definitely the best information collector. On the way here, we had already sent out several hundred slime clones. Plus, our clones kept increasing in size. After one more night, nothing in this region would be able to hide from us. However, we had only sent out a few slime clones to follow existences like Donati's and Sailor from afar. Their senses and instincts were far too sharp, and it was possible that they would be discovered if they looked at them too closely. However, Ivla and Cassio didn't have such an ability. A transparent slime bat landed right in front of them and shattered into muddy pieces, which Ivla and Cassio stepped on. Slime bats were the best eavesdroppers. Together with a long-range observer, nothing would be able to hide from us. I wasn't in a rush at all. I simply walked directly to a newspaper stand that had a familiar fairy symbol. Those fairies had already done business in the Chaos Abyss several hundred years ago. I could pretty much guess what the recent headlines would be. I had killed Lasnina. The death of a devil lord would definitely be the most important news in the near future. The fairies' news spread even faster than the thieves' guild's information. It would actually be the easiest to find major news that couldn't be hidden. I tossed out my gold coin and received a newspaper from the Black Fairies. The ink on the newspaper hadn't even dried yet. I flipped through it twice and discovered that it was indeed on the front page. However, it seemed that someone else had stolen the headlines. Shock! The devils have suffered yet another heavy blow. 2 devil lords have been killed in a single night. Why did the Abyss Prince attack? Cavendish? He's out as well.